Chapter 408. Cultivators often fought fiercely with others. No matter how strong a cultivator's physique was, it was inevitable that they would be injured. Although injuries could be healed, many hidden dangers would remain. Hua Xi's cultivation base was still low, so she was powerless against these hidden dangers. Only a medical cultivator at the level of her second senior sister, Shui Yuan, would have the ability to treat these hidden dangers. In the past, every time Lu Yi returned to the Jade Blood sect after training outside, Shui Yuan would carefully treat his body and remove all the hidden dangers. Now, it seemed that the spiritual mist in the heavenly fate pond also had the effect of treating hidden dangers. Lu Yi felt his body become much lighter, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. He still focused on practicing his flash. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. It was from Yu Lianzhou. Fellow Taoist Lu, I'm about to advance to the Cloud River realm. In addition, Shi Guang has also advanced to the Cloud River realm. Lu Yi quickly checked the spirit stream list. Sure enough, he didn't see Shi Guang's name. It seemed as Yu Lianzhou had said, Shi Guang had advanced to the Cloud River realm. Not only that, but many familiar names had disappeared from the spirit stream list, and a large number of unfamiliar names had appeared at the bottom of the list. The spirit stream list changed quickly. Under normal circumstances, a new batch of people would be completely replaced in a few months. No matter how high one's rank was, as long as one entered the heavenly fate pond 3 or 4 times, they would reach their limit. Thus, there was no point in staying in the Heaven 9 realm any longer. As for the Eliminating Leaves Alliance that Yu Lianzhou had mentioned, Lu Yi had heard about it. He knew that it was a temporary organization formed by the myriad Devil Ridge to eliminate him. Shi Guang was the leader. It was originally a temporary and loose organization. Now that Shi Guang, the leader, had run away, wouldn't the Eliminating Leaves Alliance be like a group of dragons without a leader? He sent a message to Yu Lianzhou, telling him to take care. A moment later, Yu Lianzhou's name disappeared from the spirit stream list. Outside the wooden house, Lu Yi was still focused on practicing his blade technique. When he was tired, he would cultivate and read some book. When he recovered, he would continue practicing the Jade Blood Circle. Boundless Island Station. Boundless Island was a first-grade sect with a deep foundation and a large number of talented people. At that moment, a young man was standing in a secluded area, quietly looking at an exquisite pavilion not far away. If Lu Yi were here, he would definitely recognize this young man. He was none other than Luo Ji, whom he had fought before. However, at that time, everyone's cultivation was not high. Lu Yi set out from Blue Cloud Mountain and headed towards the Blue Blood sect's encampment. Along the way, he passed by the territories of the Profound sect and the 9 Stars sect. Because he killed the 9 Stars sect's young master, he was hunted down by the 9 Stars sect. The Profound sect intervened, causing the 2 sects to fight in the heaven-splitting gorge. At that time, Luo Ji was training in the Jiuxing sect. He was asked by Dong Shai to kill Lu Yi. This fellow was the first true Dharma cultivator that Lu Yi had met. It was also because of him that Lu Yi hated the Dharma cultivator faction. Of course, Lu Yi wasn't as annoying now, mainly because Dharma cultivators were easier to kill. In the blink of an eye, 1.5 years had passed since then. Luo Ji's cultivation had also grown to the 7th heaven level. Luo Ji was different from ordinary cultivators. He directly cultivated a heaven-grade secret art. When Lu Yi met him, he was a second-order heaven-grade cultivator with over 50 apertures opened. At that time, Lu Yi was a third-order spirit stream realm cultivator. He and Luo Ji were locked in a fierce battle. In 1.5 years, Luo Ji's cultivation had risen to the 7th heaven level, with less than 300 apertures opened. This speed was undoubtedly very fast. After all, he had a good background and good aptitude. In addition, he had made great contributions to Boundless Island, so when he returned to Boundless Island after the Jiuxing sect's encampment was destroyed, he received a lot of rewards. However, Luo Ji was not satisfied with his current situation. He was still unknown in the spirit stream battlefield. The only thing he could rely on was his identity as a disciple of Boundless Island. However, Lu Yi, who was evenly matched with him back then, was now famous throughout the 9 states. What's more, Lu Yi's cultivation was already at the 8th heaven level, and he was also the spirit stream leader. Under the cover of this bright radiance, any genius would feel ashamed of their inferiority. When he returned to Boundless Island that day, he secretly vowed that one day, he would personally defeat Tiger Crossing Mountain, Lu Yi, to wash away his shame. But now, it seemed that this wish was impossible. Looking at the current spirit stream battlefield, she was probably the only one who could defeat Lu Yi. She was the woman he had brought back from the Jiuxing sect. At that time, he did not know what was so special about this seemingly dull woman. When he had gone to the Jiuxing sect's encampment to gain experience, he had followed the guidance of an elder who was proficient in divination to find a person. That elder, who was proficient in divination, had made a divination and received a prophecy of purple chi comes from the south. So, many disciples of Boundless Island had been sent to the south of the spirit stream battlefield to find the person mentioned in the prophecy. In the end, his luck was better and he found that woman in the Jiuxing sect. Reality proved that the elder's divination was not wrong. In the Jiuxing sect, this woman's performance was very dull and her talent was not very good. However, after she had followed Luo Ji back to Boundless Island, she immediately received the recognition of the inheritance left behind by the ancestral master of Boundless Island. Since then, she had been unstoppable and her cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. The last time he had seen her was a month ago. That woman's cultivation was already at the 8th heaven level. It would not be long before she reached the 9th heaven level. Luo Ji's own cultivation speed was fast enough, but compared to this woman, it was not enough. "Junior brother Luo, are you waiting for Z?" A voice suddenly sounded. Luo Ji turned his head and saw that it was senior brother Kong Bu, the guardian of his sect. He could not help but blush. "I'm just taking a walk." Kong Bu chuckled. "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Besides, you're the only one in the entire sect who can talk to Z. This junior sister. Even when I ask her something, she sometimes ignores me." Luo Ji hurriedly said, "Z means no harm. She's just a little slow." It was a well-known fact that the girl's personality was slow. Perhaps if you asked her a question today, she would only react the next day and then run over to tell you the answer. Some of the senior and junior brothers in the sect were often baffled by her. Kong Bu smiled. "Of course I know she means no harm. Junior brother Luo, there's no need to be nervous. Your senior brother is not the kind of person who likes to argue." After a pause, Kong Bu leisurely said, "Purple Chi comes from the south, Lan Zi. Eldest martial uncle's divination skills have become more exquisite." Yes, when I heard someone call her name at the 9 Stars sect's encampment, I knew she was the person I was looking for. It was precisely because Luo Ji had brought Lan Zi back that he had made a great contribution to Boundless Island. "By the way, senior brother, I remember that you sparred with Z before. Do you think she can defeat Luia if she reaches the 9th heaven?" Luo Ji asked a question he was concerned about. "Yes," Kong Bu replied without even thinking. "Last time, Z was only at the 8th heaven, but I was almost no match for her." Luo Ji did not know the result of their sparring. Hearing this, he looked happy. "That's great. The spirit stream list was so big, and so many 9th heaven cultivators were suppressed by a 8th heaven cultivator. How could the Myriad Demon's Ridge feel comfortable? If Z could defeat Luia after coming out of seclusion, it would bring great glory to the sect. Based on her cultivation speed, it shouldn't be long before she comes out of seclusion." "I hope so," Luo Ji replied casually. "By the way, I forgot to congratulate senior brother for entering the top 20 of the spirit stream list." Kong Bu smiled bitterly and shook his head. I don't deserve to be in the top 20. Recently, many people in front of him had chosen to break through to the Cloud River realm, so his ranking had naturally risen as well. In the wooden house in the Myriad Poisons forest, Lu Yi had only been living leisurely for 3 days when he received a message from Feng Yu. Fifth senior brother, it's not good. Many people from the Myriad Demon's Ridge have surrounded the 3 Sacred Academies encampment. They seem to be targeting you. Lu Yi was puzzled. Targeting me? Why would they go to the 3 Sacred Academies encampment? Feng Yu replied, they couldn't find you, so they came looking for me. I don't know how they found out I was a disciple of the Blue Blood sect. Fifth senior brother, what should we do? Wait. Lu Yi replied and hurriedly sent a message to someone else to inquire about the situation. Soon, he received some feedback. During this time, he had been hiding in the Myriad Poisons forest, and the Myriad Demon's Ridge had completely lost track of him. Now that he had reached the top of the Spirit Stream list and received a baptism from Heaven's secret, the Myriad Demon's Ridge could not bear it any longer. Lu Ye was already difficult to kill, and if he continued to grow stronger, no one in the Spirit Stream battlefield would be able to kill him. Therefore, the Myriad Demon's Ridge was now thinking of ways to force him out. As for the fact that Feng Yu was a disciple of the Blue Blood sect, no one had deliberately leaked the news. When Lu Yi had first entered the core circle, he had brought Feng Yu to the 3 Sacred Academies encampment and left her there. Those who were observant would naturally realize this. Not only had the 3 Sacred Academies encampment been surrounded, but even the Pill Heart sect's encampment had suffered an unexpected calamity. In the past, when Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian were in charge of the Pill Heart sect's encampment, no one had dared to provoke them. However, the Myriad Demon's Ridge did not care whether the Blue Blood Pill Heart sect had fallen apart or not. Any sect in the core circle that had even the slightest relationship with the Blue Blood sect was targeted. For a time, the Pill Heart sect was miserable. They could not explain anything to the Myriad Demon's Ridge, so they could only defend their encampment. Fortunately, the Myriad Demon's Ridge only wanted to force Lu Yi out, so they only surrounded the 3 Sacred Academies and the Pill Heart sect. This was to put pressure on Lu Yi. Lu Yi did not care whether the Pill Heart sect was dead or alive, but he could not ignore the 3 Sacred Academies. His conflict with the 3 Sacred Academies had been triggered by the sect master snatching 50 disciples from them. He had not fulfilled his promise to the 3 Sacred Academies to cultivate there. If the 3 Sacred Academies encampment was destroyed because of him, the sect master would not be able to explain himself to the 3 Sacred Academies. He had originally planned to cultivate to the 9th level in the Myriad Poisons forest in peace, but the wind would not stop. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Lu Yi sent a message to Feng Yu. Tell the Taoists of the 3 Sacred Academies not to panic. If the encampment is destroyed because of me, I will compensate them later. Chapter 409. Guardian Sidhu Han and Vice Guardian Shirlei were anxiously waiting at the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment. After Feng Yu ended the transmission, Sidhu Han hurriedly asked, Junior Martial Sister Feng, what did fellow Taoist Lu say? Feng Yu conveyed Lu Ye's words. Sidhu Han was relieved. With Lu Ye's guarantee, it didn't matter even if their encampment was breached. At most, they could retreat to their main sect in the 9 state. The Myriad Devil Ridge couldn't chase them to the 9 state. There was once a sect called the Sky Expanse sect in the inner circle. Because of Lu Yi, their encampment was breached. In the end, they followed Lu Yi and fought everywhere. Not only did they make up for their losses, but they also gained a lot of wealth. It was a blessing in disguise. Therefore, Sidhu Han didn't doubt Lu Ye's ability at all. At the same time, in front of the forest of 10,000 poisons, Lu Yi took out his flying spirit tool and soared into the sky. Hupa crouched on his shoulder. In the small courtyard, Hua Si watched him leave. This trip was different from last time. Last time, He was only going to the Tianji Business Alliance to buy some things and would be back soon. This time, he was going to cause trouble. Therefore, after some consideration, he took Hu Po and Yi with him. Hua Xi also wanted to go, but Lu Yi left the mother teleportation formation in the wooden house and needed someone to stay behind. Currently, a large number of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were surrounding the Third Sacred Academy's encampment in an attempt to force Lu Yi to show himself. Lu Yi wasn't stupid enough to go to the Third Sacred Academy. Under normal circumstances, as long as he revealed his whereabouts, the Third Sacred Academy's crisis would be resolved. Of course, it was also possible that the myriad Devil Ridge would go all out and directly attack the Third Sacred Academy's encampment. That wasn't something Lu Yi could control. In the air, Lu Yi took out the 10,000 Poisons map and checked the surroundings. He chose a myriad Devil Ridge encampment 300 miles away from the forest of 10,000 Poisons. This was a third-rank sect called the Lianshan sect. After identifying the direction, Lu Yi flew straight there. After being baptized by the Tianji reward, his physique and mind were strengthened. His speed of flying spirit tool also increased by a level. An hour later, Lu Ye's figure appeared outside the Lianshan sect's encampment. Immediately, a cultivator in charge of security sensed the commotion. He rushed over and asked Lu Yi through a large formation light screen, "Fellow Taoist, who is here?" Under normal circumstances, those who came uninvited were all good friends of the sect, and they only needed to inform the sect and they would be let in. But who would have thought that a cultivator from the enemy camp would come here so brazenly, all by himself? At this moment, Lu Yi was activating the Insight Spirit inscriptions to enhance his eyes as he probed the nodes of the array before him. When she heard the question, she expressionlessly turned to look at the cultivator. "Who do you think I look like?" The cultivator stared blankly for a moment, then took a closer look. His face fell, and he pointed at Lu Yi. Then, he activated Lu Yi. Lu Yi is. In an instant, the entire encampment was in an uproar. Streams of light soared into the sky from all directions and swept over here. Some people even had doubtful looks on their faces as they flew over, wondering if they had misheard. There had been no news of Lu Yi recently. Why would she suddenly come to their encampment? Lu Yi threw out a few formation flags and embedded them in the formation. As he did that, Lu Yi stopped the flow of spirit chi around the formation's light screen. Then, he raised his hand, and as if he was lifting a curtain, he lifted a corner of the great formation and walked in leisurely. Previously, when he had brought giant armor and Feng Yu to the Elixir Heart sect, he had used this method to enter the Elixir Heart sect's encampment. Even the Elixir Heart sect, a second-grade sect's array, could not stop Lu Yi, much less the Lianshan sect. However, this method did not destroy the formation. Strictly speaking, it did not affect the formation much. It was only suitable for a single person or a group of people to sneak in. Dozens of people had already gathered around, and even more streams of light were rushing over from nearby. Lu Yi had only just stepped into the array when a barrage of attacks rained down on him. Lu Yi was prepared. He hurriedly activated the defense spirit rune to protect himself. At the same time, he activated wind travel and dashed to the side. Even so, the defense spirit rune was shattered. Lu Yi reconstructed it, and the defense spirit rune was shattered again. He broke 5 spirit runes in a row and barely escaped the fate of being attacked. The weapon casket buzzed. 9 imperial weapons flew out in streams of light. Blood splattered, followed by screams. As a third-grade sect's encampment, most of the cultivators in the encampment were Heaven 7 or Heaven 8. There were very few Heaven 9 cultivators. Even if there were, they were not strong enough to enter the spirit stream list. Such a cultivator was naturally not enough in front of Lu Yi. Fortunately, the Lianshan sect's cultivators reacted quickly. In just 10 breaths, all the cultivators in the encampment came out. In an instant, the encampment was filled with streams of light. It became very lively. Although Lu Yi had broken into their encampment alone, he knew from the beginning that he could not take over a sect's encampment by himself. He just wanted to make a big enough commotion. Cultivators from the Lianshan sect kept getting killed. Lu Ye's situation gradually became worse. Rampaging through someone's encampment seemed very impressive, but in reality, it was extremely dangerous. The slightest carelessness could lead to eternal damnation. No matter how strong the defense spirit rune was, it could not withstand the joint attacks of so many cultivators. Throughout the entire process, Lu Yi defended more than he attacked. Gradually, the Lianshan sect's cultivators stabilized their footing. They suddenly realized that this notorious thug was not invincible. In a one-on-one fight, perhaps none of them could withstand a single blow from Lu Yi. However, if all the cultivators worked together, this thug would not have an easy time. After the initial panic, the Lianshan sect's guardian envoy and deputy envoy slowly calmed down and mobilized their junior brothers and sisters to chase after Lu Yi. All kinds of arrangements were quite methodical. In less than half a cup of tea's time, Lu Yi was forced to leave the Lianshan sect's encampment. After a great battle, the Lianshan sect lost 20 to 30 people. Lu Yi was also beaten into a sorry state. However, he did not leave. Instead, he stood outside the sect's great defensive formation, swallowing spirit pills while eyeing the inside covetously. In such a situation, the Lianshan sect's cultivators did not dare to open the formation to chase after him. Inside the formation, Lu Ye's space to move was limited and he was restrained everywhere. However, if the formation was opened, Lu Yi would no longer be restrained and could do whatever he wanted. The Lianshan sect's guardian envoy and deputy envoy naturally understood this point. However, the Lianshan sect's cultivators felt extremely aggrieved to have a single person blocking their encampment like this. For a time, many Lianshan sect cultivators cursed at Lu Yi through the formation's light screen. Lu Yi did not retort. Only children would quarrel. The news of Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect appearing in the Lianshan sect's encampment and sneaking into their formation to cause a ruckus quickly spread. The nearby myriad Devil Ridge cultivators all rushed over. Although Shiguang had advanced to the Cloud River realm, the Leaf Eradication Alliance did not disband. It was a very loose organization, created solely for the sake of killing Lu Yi. Thus, it did not matter whether Shiguang was present or not. All they needed to do was to maintain contact with the cultivators who wanted to kill Lu Yi. More and more cultivators gathered in the Lianshan sect's encampment. After half a month of silence, the Spirit Stream battlefield became lively again. After blocking the Lianshan sect's encampment for 2 hours, Lu Yi left on his magic tool. Since he had achieved his goal, there was no need to stay any longer. At this moment, many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were rushing toward the Lianshan sect in group. When Lu Yi left, they bumped into each other. With Lu Ye's current strength, the average core circle cultivator would not be his match unless they formed a group of 20 to 30 people. This was not the Spirit Stream List challenge, where there were all kinds of restrictions and geographical disadvantages. In a battle in the wild, it was a competition of one's foundation and means of killing the enemy. Lu Yi did not lack either of these. He rampaged all the way, and few of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators he encountered could escape with their lives. He did not have a clear goal. In any case, he just kept moving forward and killed the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators he encountered. Since the myriad Devil Ridge wanted to force him to show up, he would do as they wished. He only hoped that the myriad Devil Ridge could bear the consequences of his appearance. After suffering many losses, many people from the myriad Demon Ridge retreated. However, more people joined in the pursuit of Lu Yi. People constantly reported Lu Yi's location. Lu Yi was very glad that he had brought Yi and Hu Po. Otherwise, he would not have had time to rest. Since leaving the Lianshan sect's encampment, he had not stopped. No matter where he went, there were myriad Devil Ridge cultivators chasing after him. It was because Yi and Hoopa shared the pressure that Lu Yi was able to persevere. The myriad Devil Ridges plan was very obvious. No matter how strong Lu Yi was, there would be a limit. As long as they could drag it out until he was exhausted, they could easily kill him. It had to be said that although this method was a little stupid, it was the most effective one. Lu Yi had the talent tree and the gluttonous meal, so replenishing his spirit power was not a problem. However, if he did not rest for a long time, his mind and physical strength would not be able to hold on. Therefore, when he sensed that he was about to reach his limit, Lu Yi began to fly in the direction of the Forest of 1,000 Poisons. Now, in the core circle, the Forest of 1,000 Poisons was the only place he could go. As long as he was within 50 kilometers of the Forest of 1,000 Poisons, he could use the teleportation array to return to the wooden house. After resting in the Forest of 1,000 Poisons for a while, he could come out again to hunt the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi focused his mind and checked it. It was a message from Feng Yu. Fifth Senior Brother, the Third Sacred Academy's encampment can't be saved. I'm going back to the land of the 9 states with Senior Brother Situ and the others. Fifth Senior Brother, take care of yourself. Seeing this message, Lu Yi fell silent. The Third Sacred Academy's encampment could not be saved in the end. It made sense. It was rare for the myriad Devil Ridge to gather a large number of people outside the Third Sacred Academy's encampment. Since they had the strength to break through the encampment, they could not return empty-handed. Lu Yi sent a message but found that the message could not be transmitted. Feng Yu's imprint did not disappear, which meant that she was not dead and had returned to the land of the 9 states. If the Third Sacred Academy's encampment could not be saved, what about the Pill Heart sect? The Pill Heart sect probably would not have a good ending. In the past, the 4th Senior Brother and Senior Sister Feng were in charge, so no one dared to provoke them. Now that the 4th Senior Brother and Senior Sister Feng had both advanced to the Cloud River realm, the Pill Heart sect's cultivators of this generation were not strong. If they were really targeted, it would be difficult for them to keep their encampment. Chapter 410. Just as he was thinking about this, he received another message from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi checked it and found that it was from his second senior sister. If you have time, go to the Azure Tharch City station. Lu Yi hurriedly replied, "What's the matter? Someone wants to see you." Lu Yi felt a little strange. If he was not mistaken, the Azure Tharch City should be a second-grade sect in the Force Province. Its overall strength was only slightly inferior to those first-grade sects, and was almost the same as the Elixir Heart sect. However, Lu Yi had never dealt with people from the Azure Tharch City. He did not know why his second senior sister wanted him to go there. Since his second senior sister did not say it clearly, Lu Yi did not ask in detail. If Shui Yuan really wanted to say it clearly, she would definitely tell him. Got it. After replying, Lu Yi took out the map and found that his current location was not too far from the Azure Tharch City station. It would take less than half a day to fly there. However, when he turned his head and looked back, streams of light were chasing him like maggot. The cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge were relentless in their pursuit. In this case, it was not good to fly directly to the Azure Tharch City. He had to find a way to get rid of the spies who were following him. If he really wanted to get rid of them, Lu Yi had a way. Under the continuous activation of the flight spiritual tattoo, even the sword cultivators who were good at speed could not catch up. After making up his mind, Lu Yi was about to do so when Yi, who was standing behind him, suddenly exclaimed. Before Lu Yi could react to what had happened, he felt the spiritual power around him suddenly freeze, and his body fell diagonally down uncontrollably. Hoopa, who had been squatting on Lu Ye's shoulder, also widened his eyes and grabbed Lu Ye's clothes with his foreclaws to prevent himself from being shaken off. Although this was a sudden turn of events, Lu Yi didn't panic at all. He immediately looked around and didn't see any signs of a sneak attack. On the contrary, The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who were following behind him were all screaming and falling diagonally downward. The scene was very pleasing to the eye. Was it a flight restriction? This thought immediately popped up in Lu Ye's mind. If there was a flight restriction in this area, the flight spiritual weapon would indeed be uncontrollable when passing above. However, the spiritual power in his body was also confined. This was not just a flight restriction. If it wasn't a flight restriction, could it be a spirit restriction? That didn't seem right. The area affected was too large. A simple spirit-restricting restriction spell wouldn't be able to do this. Many thoughts flashed through Lu Ye's mind. Before Lu Ye could figure out what was going on, his spiritual energy began to circulate again. Lu Ye hurriedly urged his spiritual energy, and the figure that was originally falling diagonally down flew up again. Lu Ye, I'm afraid the magnetic field is coming. Yi's voice came from behind. With her reminder, Lu Ye finally came to her senses. Ever since he had stirred up a storm in the inner circle and led the Grand Heaven Alliance coalition army to attack the 1 to 200 sects encampments in the myriad Devil Ridge, he had heard some rumors about the 3 disasters in the Spirit Stream battlefield. The 3 disasters of the Spirit Stream battlefield referred to the Spirit Stream heavenly lightning, the protomagnetic field, and the falling leaf. The Spirit Stream battlefield didn't explode with heavenly thunder for no apparent reason. However, when it did, it often signaled the arrival of an insect swarm. That was the busiest time for all of the cultivators. Regardless of which faction or sect they belonged to, all of them were fully focused on defending against the insect swarm. The protomagnetic field was another disaster. It was even more difficult to guard against than the insect swarm. Every few years or even 10 years, a protomagnetic field would appear on the Spirit Stream battlefield. Lu Ye was no stranger to the protomagnetic field. Back in the Evil Moon Valley mine, Lu Ye had relied on the protomagnetic field to kill Manager Yang as a mortal. That was how he had embarked on the path of cultivation. The protomagnetic field in the depths of the mine wasn't strong. At most, it was an invisible force field produced by the protomagnetic field. However, Manager Yang couldn't use any of his spiritual energy and was killed by Lu Ye in a daze. What if the protomagnetic field was magnified 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times? What if the protomagnetic field swept across the entire Spirit Stream battlefield? This was the truth behind the protomagnetic field of the 3 disasters. Every time this happened, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield would be filled with the protomagnetic field. The vast Spirit Stream battlefield's spiritual chi would solidify, and even the cultivators would find it difficult to use their spiritual energy. At this time, the cultivators could not even activate the spiritual energy in their bodies, let alone absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cultivate. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, the only thing cultivators could rely on was their own bodies. For cultivators who relied on spiritual energy to fight, this was undoubtedly a great disaster. But correspondingly, this was spring for body cultivators. Weapon cultivators also had some leeway to display their abilities. As for the Dharma cultivators and ghost cultivators with weak bodies, they were generally hiding in their garrisons, trembling. The howling of the protomagnetic field had its own signs, and when the signs appeared, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield was quickly enveloped by the chaotic protomagnetic field. Lu Ye was only thankful that this natural disaster had a warning. Otherwise, if they were caught off guard, many cultivators flying in the sky would have fallen to their death. As for Yi Ye's low eyebrows, Lu Ye felt that the myriad Devil Ridge was slandering him. Therefore, when he heard this kind of joke, he just laughed it off and didn't take it to heart. Yi was a spirit body, so her perception of the origin magnetic field was extremely clear. Therefore, she had detected it earlier than Lu Ye. Return to Hu Po's body, Lu Ye hurriedly said. When the protomagnetic field filled the battlefield, the only effect on the cultivators was that they couldn't activate their spiritual energy. However, the effect on Yi was great. If she didn't hide in Hu Po's body, it was very likely that she would directly dissipate. After he finished speaking, she immediately disappeared. Hoopa, reveal your true form. Hoopa growled in response. It jumped from Lu Ye's shoulder to behind him and stood in Yi's previous position. Its demonic essence surged as it revealed its true form. Lu Yi took the opportunity to lower his altitude, flying less than 50 feet above the ground. This way, even if the same situation happened again, he wouldn't fall to his death. As a cultivator, if he really fell to his death from a high place, that would be the most tragic way to die. Just as he was done here, Lu Yi once again felt the spiritual energy in his body being sealed. He couldn't use it, and he directly fell from a height of 50 feet. He hurriedly got up and recovered his spiritual energy. He continued to fly forward on his magic tool. After this happened several times, the origin magnetic field really did fill the entire spirit stream battlefield. In an instant, all the cultivators were unable to use their spiritual energy, and the spiritual chi of heaven and earth solidified. Not only that, but even the defensive formations of the encampments collapsed on their own. The only things the cultivators could still use were the various functions that came with the battlefield imprint. After all, this was related to the mysteries of the heavens. Even the origin magnetic field couldn't affect it. Lu Yi flipped over and rode on Hoopo's back, leaving behind a trail of dust. The cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge, who were chasing after him, could only watch helplessly. Right now, Lu Yi only had one thought. It was a wise decision to bring Hoopo with him on this trip. Otherwise, he would have to rely on himself to fly. That scene was simply unimaginable. When the origin magnetic field covered the entire spirit stream battlefield, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge suddenly realized that this was an opportunity to kill Lu Yi. Ever since this guy had advanced to Heaven 8, he had become very difficult to deal with. Now that he was the top ranker of the spirit stream battlefield and had received a baptism from the heavens, he had become even more powerful than before. If the Myriad Demons Ridge had too few people, they wouldn't be able to kill him. If they had too many people, they wouldn't be able to catch him. But now that their spiritual energy had been sealed, everyone could only rely on their own bodies. If they could surround Lu Yi at this time, then just a few dozen people would be able to kill him. When they understood this, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge, who had been with Lu Yi for a long time, almost looked up to the sky and cheered. The heavens had opened their eyes. But soon, the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge realized a new problem. That was, Lu Yi had a mount. It was a white tiger that could use the sound of a tiger's roar to attack the enemy's mind. To be honest, when cultivators' cultivations were low, they liked to subdue and raise mounts. This was because mounts could not only be used to travel, but they were also a very good helper when fighting with enemies. However, once a cultivator reached the 8th order and was able to fly, they basically wouldn't subdue any mount. If they could fly, why would they need a mount? Even if they subdued a mount when their cultivation was still weak, it wouldn't be able to keep up with the growth of cultivators and would gradually be eliminated. So, if they wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to kill Lu Yi, they would need to have enough mount. At the very least, they would need to be able to keep up with others. Fortunately, there was a beast taming school. The cultivators of this school specialized in using their beasts to fight. The strength of a cultivator depended on the strength of the monster beast they controlled. When Lu Yi was challenging the rankings, he encountered a guy who brought 4 monster beasts into battle. In the end, Lu Yi killed all of them on the spot. The corpses of the monster beasts later became food for Lu Yi and Hoopo to replenish their bodies. For a time, the cultivators of the Beast Tamer School were highly sought after in the various garrisons of the Myriad Devil Ridge. Some of the demon sects even mobilized many flying demon beasts to search for Lu Yi based on his last known location. He had to find his tracks before the origin magnetic howl ended, and then cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. At this time, Lu Yi had already arrived at Azure Emperor City Station on Hoopo. Originally, it would only take half a day to travel by flying artifact, but it took him 2 days on Hu Po. This was the result of Hu Po's speed increasing after his strength had greatly increased. If it were before, it would have taken him 4 or 5 days to complete the journey. He was travel-worn. At Azure Emperor City Station, the defensive array had already been removed due to the magnetic field. All the cultivators had returned to the station and were on high alert. After all, no one knew if an enemy would take advantage of this opportunity to invade. As soon as the figure riding the white tiger appeared outside Azure Emperor City Station, he was discovered by the cultivators of Azure Emperor City. They quickly sent out a message. When Lu Yi reached the outskirts of the station, a cultivator came forward. "Are you fellow Taoist Yi from Blue Blood sect?" "Yes," Lu Yi replied. The cultivator gestured with his hand. "Fellow Taoist Yi, please." Chapter 4:11. After a short while, in the guest hall of Azure Tharch City's encampment, Lu Yi saw a young man in a robe with large sleeves. The young man looked 1 or 2 years younger than him. Now, under the shroud of the magnetic field, the spirit power in the cultivator's body was confined, so it was impossible to determine the cultivation level of the other party. However, since he was in the core circle, he must have converted to a heaven-grade cultivation technique and was at least a heaven-grade 7 cultivator. The young man stepped forward and bowed. "Xiao Changhe greets 5th Martial Uncle. This address, and this name, who is Xiao Xinghe to you?" Xiao Changhe smiled gently. "It's my father." Lu Yi understood. Before he joined the Jade Blood sect, the entire Jade Blood sect only had the sect master and second senior sister. As for eldest senior sister Wei Yang, who had appeared in the Spirit Stream battlefield, she was actually the same person as Shui Yuan, but for some reason, the two had completely different personalities, and even their figures were different. This was something Lu Yi had slowly learned after joining the Blue Blood sect. In addition to eldest senior sister and second senior sister, there were 2 senior brothers above Lu Yi. One was 4th senior brother Li Baxian, and the other was 3rd senior brother. Lu Yi had never seen this 3rd senior brother, and only knew that he was called Xiao Xinghe. So when he heard the young man opposite him call himself Xiao Changhe and call him 5th Martial Uncle, he thought of the 3rd senior brother he had never met. Although they were about the same age, it was normal for Xiao Changhe to call him 5th Martial Uncle since they were 3rd senior brother and 5th junior brother. It turned out that 3rd senior brother had joined the Azure Tharch City. Lu Yi didn't know about this until today. He only knew that 3rd senior brother had joined another sect, but he didn't know which sect it was. Looking at Xiao Changhe in front of him, his 3rd senior brother was also amazing. His child was already so big, and it was obvious that he was talented. "Is 3rd senior brother looking for me?" Lu Yi asked. Shui Yuan had sent a message to ask him to come here, and only said that someone wanted to see him. Now it seemed that it should be his 3rd senior brother. Xiao Changhe nodded. "Yes. Originally, my father wanted to invite Martial Uncle to the Azure Supreme Tharch City's main sect. However, the primordial magnetic field is howling and the force field is chaotic. The Heavenly Fate Pillar's teleportation is temporarily unable to be used. I'm afraid Martial Uncle won't be able to head to the Azure Supreme Tharch City's main sect. The Heaven's Fate Pillar's teleportation required spiritual energy. Now that the spiritual energy in the Spirit Stream battlefield was restricted, the Heaven's Fate Pillar naturally lost its ability to teleport." As he said this, Xiao Changhe handed over a small booklet. "When he sensed that the magnetic field was about to arrive, my father asked me to return to the sect and bring this item, asking me to pass it to Martial Uncle." Lu Yi took it and looked down. The booklet wasn't big, only the size of a palm. It wasn't thick either, probably only a dozen or so pages. It looked like it was sewn out of animal skin. Lu Yi casually flipped it open and saw the densely packed words on it. After skimming through a few lines, his eyebrows shot up. This was actually third senior brother's saber cultivation experience. That's right, he vaguely remembered something. When he first returned to the Blue Blood sect from the Spirit Stream battlefield, fourth senior brother had come with him. At that time, fourth senior brother had been teaching Lu Yi some fighting technique. He had complained that Lu Yi didn't learn the sword from him, but instead chose to practice the saber like third senior brother. Lu Yi still remembered the bitter expression on fourth senior brother's face when he said this. Since ancient times, those who practiced the saber looked down on those who practiced the sword, and those who practiced the sword also looked down on those who practiced the saber. Both sides hated each other. Even though they were fellow disciples, Li Baxian still wanted Lu Yi to practice the sword with him. This is a summary of my father's saber skills over the years. My father said that he hoped it would be of some help to fifth martial uncle. Since he couldn't personally give fifth martial uncle some pointers, he could only give this to you. This item will be of great use. Please thank third senior brother for me. Such a summary of saber cultivation experience was indeed a treasure for Lu Yi. He had been cultivating his saber skills all this time, but he always felt that many of his ideas were difficult to realize. Sometimes he had some ideas, but he couldn't find a suitable entry point, and there was no one to discuss it with him. He was like a blind man crossing a river. He had to rely on himself to move forward. Third senior brother's gift came at the right time. Having someone to guide him and relying on oneself were two different things. It could be said that with such a saber cultivation experience, Lu Yi could save a lot of time on searching. My father said that we are family, so there's no need to thank me. Xiao Changhe smiled and replied. He paused and said, Fifth martial uncle, my father has been training in the Cloudy River battlefield for the past 3 years and has never returned to the 9 prefectures. It was only a few days ago that he advanced to the True Lake realm and left the Cloudy River battlefield. Therefore, he knows nothing about what happened outside the Cloudy River battlefield. Lu Ye's expression changed. He understood what Xiao Changhe meant. He nodded and said, I understand. Tell third senior brother not to take it to heart. If there's a chance in the future, I will pay him a visit. Also, tell him that I, Lu Yi, am blessed. The people from the Myriad Demon's Ridge can't kill me. My father is looking forward to meeting Martial Uncle. Even though Xiao Changhe tried to persuade him to stay, Lu Yi didn't stay in the Azure Supreme Darch City for long. The people from the Myriad Demon's Ridge were definitely searching for him. If he stayed in the Azure Supreme Darch City, it would bring disaster to the Azure Supreme Darch City. Especially now that the magnetic field was howling, the teleportation of the Tianji pillar couldn't be realized. If a large number of cultivators from the Myriad Demon's Ridge came to attack the Azure Supreme Darch City, it would be impossible for them to retreat to the 9 prefectures. He rode on Hu Po and left the Azure Supreme Darch City, heading towards the Forest of 1,000 Poisons. He missed the small wooden house in the Forest of 1,000 Poisons very much. He couldn't wait to go back and comprehend the gift from his third senior brother. Although he had only glanced at the first page, he had already been greatly inspired. If he could fully comprehend third senior brother's saber cultivation experience, Lu Yi felt that his strength would be able to reach a higher level. Above the clouds, an eagle flapped its wings and soared high. The eagle's eyes reflected the figure of a young man riding a white tiger. With the cover of the clouds and extremely high altitude, even if Lu Yi raised his head, it would be difficult to notice this almost imperceptible eagle. Especially now that the magnetic field was howling and his spirit power was confined in his body, Lu Yi couldn't activate his spirit power to strengthen his eyes and use his eyesight. With his spirit power confined and the magnetic field chaotic, Lu Ye's sense of danger was greatly reduced. This also allowed some of the plans of the Myriad Demon's Ridge to proceed very smoothly. This was the last chance to kill Lu Yi. If they failed this time, they might not have such a good opportunity in the future. Therefore, the Myriad Demon's Ridge, led by the Yi League, worked together with a large number of sects and cultivators. Hu Po's speed was extremely fast. What surprised Lu Yi was that he didn't see a single person from the Myriad Demon's Ridge along the way. This puzzled him and made him feel faintly uneasy. There must be a reason for this abnormality. No matter what, he shouldn't have not encountered a single cultivator from the Myriad Demon's Ridge along the way. Unless all the people from the Myriad Demon's Ridge had retreated to their encampment. Thinking about it carefully, this was really possible. In the magnetic field chaotic environment, cultivators who used spirit power as their source of strength naturally lacked a sense of security. This was the time for them to huddle together for warmth. Although his spirit power was confined, Lu Ye's powerful mind was still somewhat affected. However, if there really were enemies spying on him, he would be able to sense them. Just as Lu Yi passed through a canyon, he suddenly felt a movement from his battlefield imprint. He quickly checked and found that someone was challenging him. His mind connected to the spirit stream list and checked the 5 people ranked at the bottom. One of them was the female archer, another was Ghost Shadow, and the last was a body cultivator. Yu Lianzhou, Shi Guang, and the others had all advanced to the Cloud River realm, so these people's rankings had naturally risen as well. The female archer and Ghost Shadow could be excluded from taking the initiative to challenge him. If those two wanted to display their strength, they relied too much on the terrain. Because this was a challenge, the initiative to choose the terrain was in Lu Ye's hands. If Lu Yi chose a battlefield that was only a few dozen feet in radius, both the female archer and Ghost Shadow would be beaten to tears. Therefore, the only candidate was the body cultivator called Zhu Peng. To challenge him at this time, Lu Yi turned his head to look at his surroundings, then looked up at the sky and frowned. Was it a coincidence? Lu Yi didn't believe that it was a coincidence. If he had been pulled into a battlefield by fate, then this canyon would be too suitable for an ambush. As long as the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge blocked his path, he wouldn't be able to escape. He didn't feel like he was being watched, which meant that either no one was watching him, or the eyes watching him were too far away, beyond the range of his senses. Thinking back to the strange situation where he hadn't even seen half of the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge, Lu Yi came to a conclusion. He decisively accepted the challenge, but Lu Yi didn't choose the terrain. As a result, he had 4 hours to prepare. As if sensing Lu Ye's intentions, the speed of the Hu Po beneath him increased by another level. His figure dashed out, quickly leaving the canyon. He continued forward. In the dark, messages were exchanged. Lu Ye accepted the challenge. Tell Brother Zhu Peng to be ready at any time. Zhu Peng is ready. The challenge hasn't started yet. Lu Ye should be stalling for time. What a pity. If we could block him at that position, he would be dead for sure. Don't worry, there's still a chance. As long as Brother Zhu Peng can hold on for an incense stick's worth of time, we can form an encirclement. At that time, Lu Ye won't be able to escape. Ask Zhu Peng if he can hold on for an incense stick's worth of time. He said he'll do his best, but we have to move quickly. Don't try your best. You must hold on for an incense stick's worth of time. We're too far away from him now. Without enough time, it's impossible to form an encirclement. He's a body cultivator. Don't tell me he doesn't have the confidence to do this? Zhu Peng said if you can do it, you'll go. He's the last hope of our Myriad Devil Ridge. How can he say such irresponsible words? If I had the qualifications to challenge Lu Ye, I would naturally do it. But I don't have the qualifications now, do I? Stop talking nonsense. Calculate his speed and the direction he's heading in. See where he'll be in 4 hours and make preparations in advance. Chapter 412. According to the calculations of the Myriad Demon Ridge, Lu Yi should be able to enter a valley in 4 hours with his current speed. Although the terrain there was not as good as the canyon just now, it was still quite suitable for forming an encirclement. News after news was sent out. Numerous cultivators of the Myriad Demon Ridge rushed towards the mountain valley, preparing to deploy their forces in advance. As long as Lu Yi entered the mountain valley and accepted the challenge, then Zhu Pang would be able to hold on for another incense stick of time. At that time, the encirclement would be complete. At that time, no matter how great Lu Ye's ability was, he wouldn't be able to break out of the encirclement. Only death would await him. The Myriad Demon's Ridges plan was very good. However, only 2 hours later, a piece of news spread. Zhu Pang has already entered the arena. What? Lu Ye didn't wait for the 4-hour time limit? Where is he now? After figuring out Lu Ye's location, the group was dumbfounded. The place where Lu Yi was standing before was actually a flat plain. This terrain was obviously not suitable for an ambush. He sensed something. Quick, 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 we don't know how long Zhu Pang can last. Quick, send someone to Lu Ye's location. The people of the Myriad Demon Ridge were not stupid. Lu Yi had deliberately chosen to enter the battle arena on a plain. There was no doubt that he was on guard. At this moment, the best thing to do was to quickly surround Lu Ye and Zhu Pang. Before the battle between Lu Ye and Zhu Pang ended, they would form a tight encirclement. Greater than a large number of cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge hurriedly took action, and they felt extremely aggrieved in their hearts. They were clearly the ones who were secretly plotting against Lu Ye this time, yet now, for some unknown reason, they seemed to have been led by the nose by Lu Ye. As the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge hurriedly moved, Lu Yi and Zhu Pang appeared at the same time on the battlefield. Logically speaking, since Lu Yi had sensed the intentions of the Myriad Devil Ridge, the safest response in the face of such a challenge was naturally to refuse. However, if he really refused, there would be others who would challenge him until he was kicked out of the Spirit Stream list. If that was the case, he would have to re-enter the rankings and recalculate the time of 1 month to obtain the reward from Tianji. All the time he had spent accumulating would have been wasted. That was why Lu Yi accepted their challenge. As long as he could win this match, no one would be able to challenge him in the future. That female archer and ghost shadow would definitely not be looking for trouble. However, to avoid getting surrounded by the Myriad Demon's Ridges members, Lu Yi needed to end the battle quickly and not give the Myriad Demon's Ridge too much time to exploit. The white light in his field of vision dissipated, and Lu Yi saw a burly figure not far in front of him. Lu Yi hadn't fought with Zhu Pang the last time he was on the ranking list. That was because when he challenged Zhu Pang had been directly rejected. At that time, Zhu Pang had been ranked in the 30s, but somehow, he had risen to the 6th position in a short period of time. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, the magnetic field howled and the force field became chaotic, causing the spiritual energy within the cultivators' bodies to be sealed. However, it wasn't affected in the arena. Without saying a word, Lu Yi first carefully put away the saber technique book that third senior brother had given him into his storage bag. Then, he immediately activated the wind spirit tattoo to strengthen his leg. Leaving behind an afterimage, he charged straight at Zhu Pang. Zhu Pang seemed to want to greet Lu Yi and stall for time, or something. However, seeing Lu Yi coming at him so aggressively, he didn't dare to say anything. With a clatter, a strange object was draped over his body. It looked like a mechanism with a huge circular plate behind it. There were 4 mechanical arms on both sides of the circular plate, 2 on the left and 2 on the right. Each of the mechanical arms held a spirit weapon. The spirit weapons on these mechanical arms should have been different types to increase their lethality. However, at this moment, Zhu Pang had replaced all of them with protective shields. Not only that, he was also holding a huge shield in his hands. This shield was twice the size of the other shields and could almost cover his burly body. Including the mechanical shield he carried on his back, there were a total of 6 shield spirit artifacts, tightly enclosing him. This was the first time Lu Yi had encountered such an opponent. This guy was clearly going to defend to the end. His intention to stall for time was too obvious. Furthermore, this was the first time Lu Yi had seen a Yenshur on the Spirit Stream list. This Zhu Peng was not only a body cultivator, but also a Yanshi. With the two schools complementing each other, it was easy to imagine how strong his defense was. It was undeniable that when Zhu Peng brought out the Yanshi creation, Lu Ye's interest was piqued. That was because these mechanical arms looked extremely sinister, like the claws of a spider. However, in reality they were extremely exquisite creations. These creations had a collective name in the Yanshi school, Yanshi armor. Zhu Peng's Yanshi armor was clearly a half-body type armor, because it only covered the upper body. According to Lu Ye's knowledge, the Yanshi of the 9 provinces could create full-body armor. It was a Yanshi armor that could completely cover a cultivator. There were also humanoid Yanshi armor and beast-type Yanshi armor. Lu Yi had seen these things in the books he had taken from Madame Yun. Because the interior of the Yanshi armor was filled with a large number of spirit tattoos, in order to create a good Yanshi armor, one had to first learn the appropriate spirit tattoos. At that time, Lu Yi had developed a strong interest in the Yanshi armor. However, he knew the principle of biting off more than he could chew, so he did not spend too much time on it. At that moment, Zhu Peng was wearing the Yanshi armor. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he had the strongest defense on the spirit stream list. In the blink of an eye, Lu Yi had already arrived in front of Zhu Peng. His body leapt high into the air, and the mountain coiling blade was unsheathed. A fiery red light surrounded it as he chopped down. Spiritual energy madly poured into the mountain coiling blade. A flash. Lu Yi had used his blade technique, which he was not very familiar with. Facing an opponent who was so proficient in defense, the only way to kill him in the shortest amount of time possible was to use the most violent attack. Zhu Peng's mechanical arms grabbed a shield in front of him. Following the activation of his spiritual energy, the shield shone brightly. It was obvious that he was going all out. Roar! Hoopa roared. Previously, when Lu Yi was fighting on the spirit stream list, Hoopa would only use the soul-sucking tiger's roar when his opponent wanted to admit defeat. However, this time, it knew that it had to end the battle quickly. Therefore, it cooperated with Lu Yi from the start. A sound wave that could be seen with the naked eye fiercely slammed into Zhu Peng's body. His body shook slightly, and the spiritual energy on the shield dimmed slightly. It was obvious that he was affected by Hoopa's roar, which caused his spiritual energy to circulate somewhat sluggishly. With a bang, the mountain coiling blade chopped down on the spirit artifact shield. The violent force behind the blow caused Zhu Peng's body to shrink, almost causing him to kneel on the ground. At the same time, the spirit artifact shield shattered into pieces. Even the mechanical arm that was holding the shield was chopped into pieces. Zhu Peng could be said to have been scared out of his wits. Previously, when he had been challenged by Lu Yi, he had directly refused. At that time, he had been working under the guidance of a martial uncle in the sect to create this half-body armor. At that time, he didn't have the confidence to fight against Lu Yi. Furthermore, his ranking at that time wasn't too high. After creating this half-body armor, Zhu Peng's strength had greatly increased, and he had triumphantly advanced on the spirit stream list. That was how he had risen from the 30th position to the 6th position, which gave him the qualifications to challenge Lu Yi. When he had challenged Lu Yi, he had been confident that he could delay Lu Yi for at least an incense stick's worth of time. However, when Lu Yi's blade chopped down, that confidence had been shattered. A 9 restrictions spirit artifact had been shattered with a single slash, and even the mechanical arms had been destroyed. Was this really a slash from a spirit stream realm cultivator? Now, he was only rejoicing that he hadn't underestimated his opponent. When he had activated the mountain coiling armor, he hadn't used any offensive spirit artifacts. Instead, he had chosen to use defensive spirit artifact. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to fight. Just as Zhu Peng was lost in thought, Lu Yi chopped down with his blade again. It was the same incomplete flash blade technique. Zhu Peng's reaction was extremely fast, and he quickly grabbed another shield to block the attack. With another crashing sound, the second shield shattered, and the second mechanical arm was destroyed. Zhu Peng's heart was bleeding. Most of his strength came from the mountain coiling armor. With the two mechanical arms destroyed, his strength had decreased by at least 20%. Moreover, the cost of repairing the mountain coiling armor would be extremely high. After the two slashes, Lu Ye's arm began to swell with pain. This incomplete blade technique placed too much of a burden on the body. When Lu Ye had practiced before, he would rest for a long time after each slash. Only then would he slash out a second time. Now that he had slashed out 2 times in a row, there was no way for him to use a third slash. Otherwise, his entire arm would be drained of strength, and he might even suffer from internal injuries. However, the destruction of the 2 shields had caused a gap to appear in Zhu Peng's impenetrable defense. In midair, Lu Ye raised his hand and pointed. Spiritual power surged, and a fiery red vermilion bird quickly took shape in front of him. It flapped its wings and rushed towards the gap in his defense. Zhu Peng saw that things weren't looking good and hurriedly dodged to the side. However, at that moment, a tiger's roar shook the sky, causing Zhu Peng's body to tremble slightly. The Fire Phoenix technique had already arrived in front of him. He had no choice but to block in front of him with his shield. The vermilion bird's figure slammed into the shield, and flames soared into the sky. The faint smell of burnt flesh wafted out, mixed with Zhu Peng's muffled groan. Lu Ye had discovered that his opponent's half-body mountain coiling armor, supplemented by his powerful physique as a body cultivator, did indeed have a strong defense. However, correspondingly, his body wasn't agile enough. When facing a weapon cultivator like himself, if he couldn't defend against an attack, he would easily be at a disadvantage. At this time, using imperial equipment wasn't the best method. Using arts was the best method, because the power of arts could more easily penetrate his opponent's defenses. Lu Ye had already swept to Zhu Peng's side. The sound of his heavy footsteps alerted Zhu Peng. He hurriedly changed the direction of his defense, wanting to block the attack coming from Lu Ye's side. However, at that moment, Hu Po's vigorous figure had already pounced forward. Its giant tiger claws slammed into one of Zhu Peng's shields, causing him to stagger. Hu Po's abilities had never been limited to Tiger's Roar. It was a powerful vicious beast in itself, and its metal elemental Yao essence manifested its murderous nature. However, there were very few occasions where it would be required to take action. Normally, when it encountered an enemy, Lu Ye would be able to take care of it on its own. If Lu Ye couldn't take care of it, it wouldn't be of any use. However, it was different this time. Lu Ye needed to take care of this opponent who had defended himself to the teeth in the shortest amount of time possible. This gave Hu Po room to display its abilities. Chapter 413. Before this battle, Zhu Peng had made an extremely wrong decision, which was to focus all of his power on defense. In fact, if he had performed normally, he might not have been in such an awkward situation. However, completely abandoning his offensive methods in exchange for defense did not bring him much safety. This was also because of Lu Ye's fierce reputation. Even if he had the hidden dragon armor and his strength had increased greatly, he still did not have the confidence to defeat Lu Ye. He had indeed made his defense impenetrable, but when a flaw appeared in this impenetrable defense, he no longer had any room to fight back. At the same time that Hu Po's huge tiger claw slammed down, Lu Ye also launched an attack from the side. The sharp blade was wrapped in killing intent, causing Zhu Peng's body to turn cold. He focused all of his attention on Lu Ye and Hu Po, using all of his power to defend against the attacks from the man and the tiger. However, at that moment, a violent surge of spiritual power came from the side of his body. A huge impact swept over, rushing through the gap in Zhu Peng's defense and fiercely slamming into his body. In that instant, Zhu Peng felt as if his entire body was about to be torn apart. If not for his strong physique as a body cultivator, This attack would have been enough to take his life. Even so, the sharp attack tore through his chi, blood, and spiritual power defense, leaving behind bloody wounds on his body. He could even faintly see his squirming organs. He quickly turned his head and looked in the direction of the attack, his eyes narrowing. In his field of vision, he saw the reflection of a young girl. The spiritual power around her was boiling, condensing into a violent technique. The attack that had hit him just now had come from this young girl. What was going on? Zhu Peng was stunned. The challenges of the Spirit Stream list had always been one-on-one. Lu Ye had a pet beast, and bringing it in was not a big deal. This was permitted by Tianji. After all, there was a school of beast taming in this world. Cultivators used their monster beasts to fight. If they were not allowed to bring their pet beasts, then the beast-taming school's cultivators would not have much fighting power. But what was going on with this young girl? She couldn't be a pet beast, right? This was completely illogical. The first thought that popped into Zhu Peng's mind was that Lu Ye had used some unimaginable method to bypass Tianji's surveillance and brought a group of Dharma cultivators to beat him up. However, he soon felt that such a matter was impossible. The Heavenly Mystery Sect was high and mighty, and had always been fair and just. This was especially true for the Spirit Stream list challenges, which had never had any problems since ancient times. There was no reason for such a huge oversight. But soon, he no longer had to think about these puzzling questions, because under Yi's barrage of spells, Zhu Peng's burly body was like a canoe drifting in the middle of a stormy sea, swaying unsteadily. Lu Yi and Hu Po were also attacking from the side. Along with the shattering of another shield spirit tool, a great sense of crisis enveloped him, and the aura of death assaulted his face. Hu Po howled madly, and the soul-absorbing impact caused Zhu Peng's face to contort in pain. Blood flowed from his nostrils, and there was a vague thought in his mind that kept urging him to admit defeat. However, he couldn't concentrate, and the words that were at the tip of his tongue couldn't leave his mouth. Even more spells landed on his burly body. A sharp saber pierced through the gap in his defenses, pierced through his chin, and came out from the top of his head. The chaotic fluctuations of spiritual energy abruptly calmed down at this moment. Yi dispersed the technique she had condensed in her hand, and Hu Po also retreated to the side. He crouched down slightly, looking like he could explode with an attack at any time. Drip, drip, blood dripped onto the ground. Zhu Peng lowered his eyes and looked at the young man who was close to him. His eyes were filled with nostalgia and unwillingness to accept his current situation. Lu Yi pulled out his blade. Blood spurted out, and the burly figure fell to his knees with a thud. Then, he slowly prostrated himself on the ground, and the ground beneath his corpse was quickly dyed red with blood, his life force dissipated. Yi quickly went forward and collected the spoils of war. She put the other party's damaged armor into her storage pouch, then tossed the storage pouch to Lu Yi. Only then did she flash back into Hu Po's body. At this time, Lu Yi had already taken out many bandages and healing pills from his storage pouch. He also took out a bundle, wrapped it up, and tied it to Hu Po's back. Accepting Zhu Peng's challenge was just the beginning. If his predictions were correct, he would probably have to kill his way out. Under the howling of the magnetic field, spiritual energy was completely sealed, and there was no way to open his storage pouch. Naturally, these healing items had to be prepared first. Not only that, Lu Yi also specially found a few sabers that were similar in shape to the mountain saber from the many spoils of war. When everything was ready, Lu Yi stuffed a few healing pills into his mouth, then turned around and rode on Hu Po's back. Only then did he allow Tianji to teleport him out of the arena. When he returned, it was still that boundless plain. Just as his vision recovered, a strong gust of wind attacked from the side, ruthlessly slamming into Hu Po. Even with Hu Po's strength, he staggered a little from the impact. An angry tiger roar rang out, and a tiger claw slammed down in the direction of the attack. Accompanied by a mournful roar, the sharp tiger claw scraped off a layer of flesh. At the same time, a fierce attack attacked Lu Yi. Almost instinctively, Lu Yi slashed back with his saber. With a clang, the spirit weapon that was slashing towards Lu Yi was sent flying. There were even cries of surprise from cultivators. It was only then that Lu Yi saw clearly who had attacked him and who put. It was a Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator riding a rhinoceros demon beast. The one that had crashed into Hu Po was the demon beast, and the one attacking Lu Yi was the cultivator on its back. However, both the demon beast and the cultivator on its back had suffered a great loss. When the two figures passed each other, the cultivator even fell directly from the rhinoceros's back. Lu Yi raised the long saber in his hand and was about to end the cultivator's life when a few huge figures rushed over from all directions. They were all cultivators riding different demon beasts. Although he had killed Zhu Pang at an extremely fast speed in the battle arena, there were still some cultivators from Myriad Demon's Ridge who had rushed to his original position and attacked him as soon as he appeared. Fortunately, there weren't many of them. Without needing Lu Ye's instructions, Hu Po had already leaped high into the air, directly jumping out of the encirclement of the demon beast. In midair, Lu Yi bent down and slashed with his saber. A cultivator stabbed a spear at Hu Po's waist. With a crisp clang, Hu Po landed 100 feet away and sprinted away. The cultivators behind him hurriedly turned their mounts around and chased after him. For a moment, on the plain, a snow-white figure dashed forward. The pursuers behind him were unwilling to let him go, and they were shouting loudly, "Lu Ye is here! Quickly kill Lu Ye! Don't let him escape!" Looking down from the sky, more cultivators riding demon beasts were converging. Although there weren't many of them, there were still more than 30 of them. Lu Yi was only glad that he had killed Zhu Pang quickly enough. If he had come out of the battle arena a dozen breaths later, he would have been surrounded by the people from Myriad Demon's Ridge. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. An attack came from above. This attack caught Lu Yi and Hu Po somewhat unprepared. Even though Lu Ye's reaction was extremely fast and blocked some of the attacks with his long saber, some attacks still landed on him and Hu Po. However, a comical scene occurred. Although those attacks hit him and Hu Po, the damage they caused was almost negligible. Lu Yi looked up and saw more than 10 figures of birds in the sky. There were also some Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators standing on the backs of the bird. At this moment, they were all holding longbows and continuously shooting arrows downward. However, how powerful could arrows without the support of spirit power be? Regardless of whether it was Lu Yi or Hu Po, they could block the attacks with their physical bodies alone. Those arrows would at most cause some scratches to Lu Yi. As for Hu Po, there wouldn't even be a scratch left. How can Lu Ye's physique be so strong? The Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators were all shocked when they saw that Lu Ye's arrows were unable to do anything to him. They originally thought that with their flying mounts, they would definitely be able to kill Lu Yi. However, it now seemed that they had been too naive. Lu Ye's physique was a little too strong. Strictly speaking, the changes to his physique had slowly begun after he tempered his body with the dragon spring. The dragon spring itself wasn't very effective, but Lu Yi had brought out a scale armor from the dragon spring. The scale armor was rich in blood chi and had the effect of strengthening his physique. Lu Yi used the scale armor to temper his physique and strengthen his blood chi and blood. Now, the blood chi in the scale armor had been completely consumed. Moreover, every time he returned to the Jade Blood Sect, the medicinal cuisine cooked by Shui Yuan had the effect of strengthening his physique. One had to know that the blood-red trout in the Moon Lake had been used to temper the bodies of the Jade Blood Sect's disciples. Every official disciple only had a share of one, and Lu Yi had eaten a lot of them back in the sect. In addition, ever since he cultivated the gluttonous feast, his appetite was much larger than the average person's. He ate a lot, and all of it was converted into his blood chi and blood. Naturally, his physique had slowly become stronger. However, He had never cultivated his body using the methods of a body cultivator, so his physique wasn't considered burly. There was also the baptism bestowed upon him by the heavens. With all of these accumulations, Lu Ye's physique was naturally far inferior to that of a talented fellow like Giant Armor. However, he wasn't the slightest bit inferior to ordinary body cultivators. In fact, he was even stronger. As for Hu Po, it went without saying. Hu Po had devoured the most blood qi in the scale armor. If the scale armor's blood qi was divided into 10 parts, Hu Po would take 50%, Lu Yi would take 30 to 40%, and Giant Armor would take 20%. Moreover, Hu Po was a monster beast and had learned the cultivation method of absorbing the essence of the sun and moon from Giant Armor. In terms of the strength of his physique, Hu Po was comparable to 2 or 3 Lu Yes. When he circulated his monster qi, even if a cultivator attacked him with a spirit weapon, they wouldn't necessarily be able to hurt him. The benefits of having thick skin and thick flesh were evident. If an ordinary cultivator was hit by an arrow like this, they would definitely be injured. Once the injuries accumulated, they wouldn't be far from death. However, neither Lu Yi nor Hu Po were affected by the arrow. At first, Lu Yi used his long saber to block the attack from above, but when he realized that the attack was no different from scratching an itch, he ignored it. Chapter 4:14. Lu Yi had broken out of the encirclement and escaped. The news spread like wildfire. Many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators checked the Spirit Stream list in shock and discovered that Zhu Pang, who was originally ranked 6th, had disappeared. Less than 30 breaths of time had passed since Lu Yi entered the battlefield and reappeared, but Zhu Pang's name had already been erased from the Spirit Stream list. This undoubtedly meant one thing. Zhu Pang had been killed. What kind of trash was that Zhu Pang? The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators in front of him constantly set up formations to intercept him. This was unavoidable. With Hu Po's current speed, ordinary demon beasts simply couldn't catch up to him. However, there were a dozen or so flying demon beasts in the sky that he couldn't shake off. They constantly reported Lu Ye's location in all directions. The nearby myriad Devil Ridge cultivators could naturally make some arrangements in advance based on the direction Lu Ye had fled in. Facing these interceptions, Lu Ye avoided them as much as he could. If he couldn't, he would directly kill his way out. After advancing for 1 hour, another group of cultivators from the myriad demons ridge blocked their path. There weren't too many of them, only around 30 or so. However, judging by their calm demeanor, it was clear that they had been here for quite some time. Looking at the figures and attire of these myriad Devil Ridge cultivators, there was no doubt that they were all body cultivators and weapon cultivators. With the whistling of the origin magnetic field and the restriction of spiritual power, the weak magic cultivators and ghost cultivators didn't dare to show their faces. As for medical cultivators, they didn't dare to show their faces. Facing the youth riding the white tiger, the body cultivators at the front of the group took up a blocking stance. The weapon cultivators at the back also gripped their spirit weapons tightly. There was even a body cultivator who roared loudly, "Lu Ye, quickly come and die." Lu Ye didn't bother to pay attention to them. Without his command, Hu Po rushed to the side. Although he wasn't afraid of these myriad Devil Ridge cultivators and was even confident that he could kill some of them, he was still alone. If he could avoid a battle, he would do his best to save his strength and energy. However, just as Hu Po rushed out 300 feet, Lu Ye suddenly felt a sense of foreboding. At the same time, Hu Po, who was running forward, staggered. The ground beneath his feet caved in, forming a pit. The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators had dug a pit in advance, and the pit was filled with sharp weapons. If Hu Po were to fall into such a trap, he might not lose his life, but he would definitely be in a sorry state. At that time, it would be difficult for him to escape when the people from the myriad Devil Ridge surrounded him. In an instant, Lu Yi understood the intentions of the myriad demons Ridge cultivators. They had deliberately flaunted their strength in order to lure him to take a detour. If he chose to do so, he would fall into their trap. This was because no matter which direction he took, there would always be such trap. Fortunately, Hoopoe's reaction speed was extremely fast. The moment he sensed that something was wrong beneath his feet, he leaped high into the air. With a crash, a few well-hidden figures suddenly emerged from the flat ground in front of them. At the same time that those people appeared, a row of barricades suddenly appeared on the flat ground. The sharp spikes were slanted in the direction of Hoopoe's jump. Not only that, but further behind, 6 people also leaped into the air and pulled out a large net to cover the front. The myriad devil ridge's careful deployment was beginning to show. Now that Hoopoe was in midair, he had nowhere to borrow strength. If he were to fall directly, he would definitely crash into the sharp barricades. No matter how tough Hoopoe's skin was, he would definitely be injured if he crashed into them. If he was not careful, he might even be pierced through. A tiger's roar shook the sky. Hoopoe had obviously sensed the danger, but he was powerless to change anything. Although he was psychic and knew human nature, he was only a demonic beast after all. How could he understand the treachery of human nature? Seeing that Hoopoe's body was beginning to fall, the eyes of the group of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators shone with anticipation. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly flipped down from Hoopoe's back and grabbed one of Hoopoe's big ears. While he was in midair, he forcefully twisted his body, and with the help of the spinning force, he forcefully flung Hoopoe away, changing Hoopoe's landing spot. Meanwhile, he himself was crashing towards the barricades. In an instant, he was right in front of Hoopoe. Lu Ye's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He grabbed a sharp thorn and pressed his palm against it, leaping over the sharp obstacle. When he landed, he slid several feet away before he could stabilize himself. Roar! Hoopoe roared angrily. When he landed heavily, a large net was already covering his head. The large net pulled out by the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators was originally aimed at Lu Yi. However, Lu Ye's movements were more agile than Hoopoe's, so they couldn't target him. They could only settle for the next best thing, which was to cover Hoopoe first. Lu Yi had just stabilized himself when he was surrounded by the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. There were also the 30 or so cultivators he saw earlier, and they were all rushing over. Hoopoe was roaring angrily, trying to break free from the large net. If it was an ordinary object, Hoopoe could easily tear it apart with his powerful strength. However, the large net was obviously a spiritual weapon. Although the cultivator's spiritual power was restricted and there was no way to unleash the true power of the large net, its tenacity was obvious. Hoopoe was trapped inside and couldn't break free for the time being. "A few more, we can't hold him down anymore," someone roared in panic. The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators had underestimated Hoopoe's strength. 6 cultivators from the core circle joined forces, and all of them were body cultivators and weapon cultivators. However, even with the help of a spiritual net, they still couldn't suppress the enraged Hoopoe. Instead, they were almost injured by Hoopoe's charge. A few of the 30 or so cultivators who came to support Hoopoe immediately rushed over. Each of them held a corner of the spiritual net and exerted pressure on Hoopoe. While Hoopoe was trapped, Lu Yi was already fighting with the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators surrounding him. He knew that his time was limited, so he naturally wouldn't just stand there stupidly. If he couldn't rescue Hoopoe in a short time and fight his way out of the encirclement, he was afraid that he would really die here this time. He could only see so many myriad Devil Ridge cultivators, but there were even more enemies rushing over from places he couldn't see. Therefore, the longer this dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for him. The mountain pan saber was already out of its sheath, and it charged straight at a body cultivator. In the blink of an eye, it closed in and slashed down at the body cultivator. This body cultivator also held a saber-shaped spirit artifact in his hand. However, it was an orthodox machete, wider and shorter than Lu Ye's mountain pan saber. When the machete slashed down, the body cultivator also met it with his own machete. A clanging sound rang out. The body cultivator's eyes widened, and the machete in his hand flew out. When cultivators couldn't use their spirit energy, they could only rely on their own physique. Under normal circumstances, this body cultivator with only a celestial 8 cultivation level wouldn't dare to fight Lu Yi head-on no matter what. Who didn't know that Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect could kill cultivators of the same cultivation level as if they were chickens? However, this was the time for body cultivators to shine. He felt that he could at least restrain Lu Ye. However, the result shocked him to his core. The other party's strength was so strong that he couldn't resist at all. The moment the machete in his hand flew out, the web between his thumb and forefinger cracked. Immediately after, a flash of saber light flashed in front of his eyes. The body cultivator immediately covered his throat and staggered back. Blood flowed between his fingers. After killing a body cultivator with 2 machetes, Lu Yi was also hit by several spirit artifacts at the same time. His body trembled slightly and he felt pain. Obviously, he was injured. His physique was indeed very strong, but it wasn't to the extent that he could completely ignore sharp weapons, especially when they were wielded by cultivators from the core circle. Not caring about his injuries, Lu Yi slashed to the side again. This time, his opponent was a weapon cultivator holding a long spear. Seeing the machete light coming, the weapon cultivator was terrified and obviously wanted to retreat. However, the machete was too fast. Just as he thought about it, the machete had already landed on his chest. As if he had been hit by a mountain, the weapon cultivator immediately flew into the air. His chest was split open and blood spurted out. He fell to the ground on his back, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Lu Yi knew that in a situation like this where he was surrounded, he absolutely could not stand still. Otherwise, he would be surrounded by the enemy's attacks from all directions. Once the enemy formed a circle, he would be led by the nose by the enemy. Therefore, he constantly waved the machete in his hand. He focused on one direction and killed. As long as he killed fast enough, the enemies would never be able to attack him from behind. As for the attacks from the front and sides, he could block or ignore them depending on the situation. Most of the time, he ignored them because he wanted to kill this group of people in the shortest time possible, so he could only trade injuries for lives. 1 machete for a weapon cultivator, 2 machetes for a body cultivator. When Lu Yi killed his way out of the myriad Devil Ridge, 7 or 8 people were lying on the ground along the way. Less than 10 breaths of time. The mountain plate saber was covered in blood, and Lu Ye's body was also covered in wounds. He turned around, shook off the blood on the mountain plate saber, and once again charged toward the group of people from the myriad Devil Ridge. His powerful physique allowed him to surpass Spirit Stream Realm cultivators in terms of strength and speed. Under the restriction of spiritual energy, all cultivators were unable to use their own spiritual energy. The advantage of having a powerful physique was imperceptibly magnified to the extreme. Looking at the blood-soaked youth with drooping eyes and an expressionless face, even if there were dozens of people from the myriad Devil Ridge, they couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. Lu Yi had killed 7 or 8 people in a single charge. At this rate, everyone here would be killed in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Hold on, there are still many fellow cultivators on the way. Even though the body cultivator closest to Lu Yi was panicking, he still loudly encouraged the others. Immediately, someone else echoed, "That's right. If we don't kill him this time, I'm afraid we won't have another chance in the future. Fellow cultivators, don't be afraid. Delay him and we'll win." Just as he finished speaking, Lu Yi charged toward them again. "Kill!" The body cultivator who had shouted earlier roared and was the first to meet Lu Yi, brazenly and fearless. However, when the machete slashed down, the body cultivator's head flew high into the air. After another round of killing, Lu Ye's body was covered in more and more wounds. His body was covered in blood, both his own and the enemy's. Along the way, nearly 10 myriad Devil Ridge cultivators lay dead. This time, Lu Yi didn't stop. Instead, he charged toward Hupu. Although he had the ability to kill everyone here, if he really did so, he wouldn't have an easy time. The injuries that the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators left on his body weren't serious, but there were too many of them. Almost every time he killed someone, there would be a few more wounds on his body. Chapter 4:15. Most importantly, Hupo's current situation was far from good. Nearly 10 myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were controlling the spirit net, trapping Hupo within. No matter how much he struggled, he couldn't break free from the spirit net's shackles. There were also 2 cultivators. One of them was lying on the ground with his head split open, his life force gone. The other had his chest caved in and was heavily injured. These 2 fellows had clearly been attacked by Hupo while they were trying to control it. When Hupo's huge tiger claws came crashing down, no spirit stream stage cultivator would be able to withstand it without being able to circulate their spiritual power. These 2 were unlucky. If there was only this spirit net, Hupo wouldn't be in any danger. More importantly, there were still cultivators riding flying demonic beasts in the sky. These people had originally wanted to kill Lu Yi and Hupo with their arrows, but they hadn't been able to do so. Previously, they had been acting as spies, monitoring Lu Ye's movements and informing everyone. Lu Yi was on a killing spree, so they didn't dare to come down and provoke him. However, they could still do something to Hupo. When Hupo was wrapped in the spirit net, the cultivators controlled their flying demonic beasts to grab onto a corner of the spirit net. Clearly, they wanted to bring Hupo into the air. Arrows couldn't kill Hupo, but if they were high enough, they could drop him to his death. By the time Lu Yi charged over, Hupo was already wrapped in the spirit net and was 10 meters off the ground. As he charged towards Hupo, Lu Yi exerted strength in his legs and leapt high into the air, viciously slashing at the claws of a flying demonic beast. The demonic beast clearly sensed danger. Before Lu Ye's attack could reach it, it hastily spread its wings and flew high into the air, simultaneously releasing the spirit net it was holding onto. Lu Yi took advantage of the opportunity to climb onto the spirit net. Stepping on the spirit net's knots, he rushed to the other side in a few leaps. He stared at the flying demonic beast and raised his blade, ready to slash. How could the cultivator on the demonic beast's back let Lu Yi slash with his blade? He immediately controlled his mount to release the spirit net and soar into the air. At the same time, Hupo struggled in the spirit net and finally broke free from its shackles. His sturdy body fell down. Lu Yi didn't continue to tangle with him and jumped down with him. Below them, the cultivators of Myriad Devil Ridge, who had recovered from their shock, once again got into formation. When Hupo and Lu Yi landed, they all slashed their blades. Hupo roared angrily while Lu Yi groaned. In an instant, both the man and the tiger had suffered quite a few injuries. "Let's go." Lu Yi jumped onto the tiger's back and gritted his teeth. Hupo stared in one direction and dashed forward. Anyone who dared to block his path would either be knocked away by Hupo or killed by Lu Yi with a single slash. After being entangled for a short while, he was covered in blood and killed his way out of the encirclement, fleeing straight ahead. The remaining Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators did not give chase. Instead, they looked at the fleeing man and tiger with lingering fear. In this short confrontation, nearly half of the 30 to 40 people had died, but they still couldn't kill Lu Yi. This battle made them deeply realize how unreasonable it was for a person to be strong. None of them had mounts, so they couldn't catch up to them. Their mission had been completed. Although they had suffered heavy casualties, Lu Yi didn't have it easy either. They could only leave the rest to the fellow cultivators in front of them. They didn't give chase, but the cultivators on flying beasts continued to follow them in the air. Within a radius of a few dozen miles, any cultivator from the Myriad Devil Ridge would know where Lu Yi was just by looking up. Lu Yi knew that this couldn't go on. If he didn't think of a way to get rid of those flying demonic beasts, he wouldn't be safe no matter where he went. He was quite experienced in dealing with this kind of situation. The enemy had control of the air and could monitor his movement. Then, he only needed to escape into the depths of the mountains and forests. He could use the geographical advantage to cover his tracks and get rid of those omnipresent spies. He couldn't open his storage bag and couldn't use the 10 points map. Lu Yi followed his memory and quickly thought of a place to go. He directed Hu Po in a different direction. An hour later, the man and tiger rushed out of the boundless plains and into a forest. This place didn't have the unique environment of the hidden fog mountain, but the forest was deep, the trees tall, and the foliage thick. Even if the myriad demons' ridge cultivators were riding flying demonic beasts, it wouldn't be easy to find him in this place. After entering the forest, the tiger galloped all the way to the depths of the forest and finally got rid of those flying demonic beasts. After finding a cave, the man and the tiger both laid there, exhausted. After a long time, Lu Yi stood up and tore off his blood-soaked clothes. He then took the bag from Hu Po's back. Fortunately, the bag he prepared in the battlefield hadn't been lost. There were many bandages and ointments inside, as well as some healing pills and daily necessities. First, Lu Yi gave himself and Hu Po some healing pills. Then, he took out some ointments and smeared them on his wounds. He grimaced in pain. After busying himself, Lu Yi wrapped himself up like a dumpling and bandaged Hu Po's wound. It wasn't easy to start a fire, so he took out some jerky from the bag and shared it with Hu Po. After filling his stomach a little, Lu Yi felt a little better. He leaned against the cave wall and closed his eyes to rest. Hu Po also lay down beside him, his stomach constantly rising and falling. Less than an hour later, Lu Yi opened his eyes. There seemed to be some movement outside. Hu Po also raised his head, apparently sensing something. There was no end to it. Lu Yi got up and flipped onto the tiger's back. Hu Po rushed out of the cave and met a few myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who were searching in their direction. When they saw each other, those people were clearly stunned. Before they could react, Hu Po had already rushed in front of them and slapped down with his huge tiger claws. At the same time, Lu Yi raised his saber and slashed down. Short screams rang out as several myriad Devil Ridge cultivators lay in pools of blood. Hurriedly collecting his spoils of war, Lu Yi rode Hu Po again and began to flee. Everyone in myriad Devil Ridge knew that this was the best chance to kill Jade Bloodsex Lu Yi. Now that his whereabouts had been exposed and he had the help of Origin Magnetic Whistle, as long as they could surround him, he would undoubtedly die. No one wanted to miss such an opportunity, so they went all out in this pursuit. Even if Lu Yi and Hu Po fled into the depths of the forest, they still couldn't find peace. In a few days they had moved around a large area. No matter where they hid, enemies would come knocking on their door in less than an hour. The continuous battles didn't give Lu Yi and Hu Po much time to rest. The man and tiger were both physically and mentally exhausted. The good grade honey brought out from the hidden fog mountain was a great help. This kind of thing had a very obvious effect on recovering physical strength. However, Lu Yi knew that continuing like this wasn't a solution. He originally thought that as long as he fled into this place, he would be able to escape the surveillance from the sky. Now, it seemed that he had underestimated the enemy's determination and boldness to kill him. The myriad Devil Ridge had already put on a stance of fighting to the death. He still had to return to the myriad poison forest. Only by returning there and relying on the terrain there could he completely escape the myriad Devil Ridge's pursuit. With a plan in mind, he and Hu Po replenished their physical and mental strength. Then, the man and tiger once again embarked on the road of escape. Half a day later, Hu Po rushed out of the forest with Lu Yi and headed straight for the myriad poison forest. A moment later, the myriad Devil Ridge discovered Lu Ye's movements. A large number of cultivators withdrew from the forest. Those who had the ability to pursue joined the ranks of the pursuers. However, most of them didn't have the ability to participate in the pursuit. After all, not every cultivator had a pet beast. It was a spectacular scene. Along the way there were occasional fights. In order to return to the myriad poison forest as soon as possible and to prevent being surrounded by the myriad Devil Ridge people, Hoopoe almost didn't stop for a rest. At the end of the run, Hoopoe's entire body was emitting white mist. After a full 3 days, the myriad poison forest was in sight. At this point, the myriad Devil Ridge had also noticed Lu Ye's intentions. Although they didn't know how this guy had survived in the myriad Devil Ridge the last time, he was obviously going to use the same trick again and enter the myriad poison forest. If he really rushed into the myriad poison's forest, then this operation would end in failure again. Therefore, no matter what, they couldn't let Lu Ye enter the myriad poison forest again. With the convenience of flying monsters, the myriad Devil Ridge's side transported people back and forth in an extremely short period of time. By the time Lu Ye rode Hoopoe to the edge of the myriad poison forest, there were already close to 200 cultivators who had formed a dense defensive line. White mist rose from Hoopoe's body, and its running body slowly came to a stop. Its beast eyes looked at the densely packed enemies in front of it, and it let out a low, threatening growl. On Hoopoe's back, Lu Ye sighed softly. If he could use his spirit power, he was confident that he could charge through and kill more than 200 enemies by himself. At the very least, if he couldn't win, he could use wind walk or flight wings to escape. However, under the restriction of spirit power, he couldn't kill his way through no matter what. This was especially true after 3 days of fleeing and fighting. Both he and Hoopoe were exhausted. Lu Ye! An angry roar came from the other side. Come and fight! Although it wasn't a glorious thing to bully someone with numbers, thinking back to Lu Ye's campaign until now, there were probably thousands of myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who had died at his hands. Therefore, to the myriad Devil Ridge, as long as they could kill Lu Ye, it didn't matter whether it was glorious or not. No one cared. If he lived, there would only be more myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who would suffer in the future. Hoopoe paced back and forth. Lu Ye raised his hand and tapped on his battlefield imprint, sending out a message. I might not be able to come back for a while. I have to circle around and see if I can enter from another direction. The chances were slim. If he could circle around, so could the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. As long as the myriad Devil Ridge had their eyes on him, he wouldn't be able to kill his way into the myriad poison forest. However, in this huge spirit stream battlefield, aside from the myriad poison forest, the only place he could go was the Jade Blood Sect's encampment. Xiao Hui was overseeing the encampment. An overlord-grade flying demonic beast was very frightening, so the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators wouldn't dare to act rashly. However, the Jade Blood Sect's encampment was located at the outermost edge of the outer circle and was extremely far away. With Hoopoe's speed, he might not be able to reach it even if he ran for a month. Therefore, there was still hope in the myriad poison forest. He would do his best and leave the rest to fate. Just as Lu Ye was thinking this, he received a reply from his battlefield imprint. Wait, don't move. I'll come and get you. The person who sent the message was naturally Hua Ci. During this time, she had been paying attention to Lu Ye's movements and knew that he was being hunted down. Outside the myriad poison forest, Lu Ye frowned. He didn't know what Hua Ci wanted to do. Chapter 4:16. It was undeniable that after Ying Shan obtained her own inheritance, Hua Ci had completely broken free from the shackles of a medical cultivator. As a medical cultivator, she could practice medicine to help the world and also kill enemies. Moreover, she had always killed people secretly. However, Lu Ye did not know how she could help in the current situation. Outside the forest of 1,000 poisons, Lu Ye and more than 200 cultivators from the Myriad Demon's Ridge were facing each other from several hundred feet away. Lu Ye did not move, and neither did the Myriad Demon's Ridge. It was not that they did not want to kill Lu Ye, but they did not have enough manpower. If they rushed over now, Lu Yi would definitely run away. Continuing to drag things out like this was advantageous for the Myriad Demon's Ridge. The longer they dragged things out, the more cultivators would gather. Of course, they hoped that Lu Yi would take the initiative to attack. In this way, they could wait for the enemy to exhaust themselves. No matter what, 200 people could kill this jinx that made all the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators restless. Flying demonic beasts flew back and forth in the sky, transporting the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators from afar. The lineup of more than 200 people continued to expand. A Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivator shouted, "Lu Yi, you can't run away. Just accept your death obediently." Lu Yi was indifferent and silently chewed on the healing pill. Suddenly, his expression changed and he looked up at the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators. For some reason, there seemed to be some commotion among the enemies gathered there. At the same time, at the place where the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators gathered, some were listening attentively while others were bewildered. Some strange sounds seemed to be coming from the forest of 1,000 poisons behind them. "What's that sound?" The person who asked the question turned back, but the forest of 1,000 poisons was full of poisonous miasma and the environment was harsh. If one did not go deep, what could they see? More people listened attentively. Soon, a dense rustling sound entered their ears. It sounded like many things were crawling across the ground and there were slight signs of wings flapping. Whoosh! A large number of colorful moths and butterflies rushed out of the poisonous miasma and covered the place where the Myriad Demon's Ridge cultivators were gathered. The cultivators gathered there were all shocked. Not only was the forest of 1,000 poisons filled with poisonous miasma, but there were also poisonous creatures everywhere. Last time, when Lu Yi was trapped in the Myriad Poisons forest, many cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge had gone deep into the forest to search for traces of him. In the end, not only were they unable to find Lu Yi, but they were also put in a difficult situation by the poisonous creatures in the forest. Some even died because of it. These colorful moths and butterflies were the most commonly seen poisonous creatures in the forest. The toxicity was not too strong, but if one's skin was accidentally contaminated with their powder, it would become unbearably itchy. It was definitely a terrible experience. Thus, when they saw the overwhelming number of moths and butterflies, the group of cultivators panicked and scattered to avoid them. Some of them even brandished their spirit artifacts and slapped them. "Don't hit them, get out of the way!" Someone shouted in panic. The moths and butterflies were fine if they didn't attack them, but once they did, the moths and butterflies began to drop even more dust. Without the protection of spiritual energy, no matter how fast the cultivators moved, it was difficult for them to prevent the fine dust from touching their bodies. For a moment, many of them felt itchy all over, and they had to scratch themselves. Just as the situation became chaotic due to the large number of moths and butterflies, someone suddenly cried out, "Spiders!" A cultivator from the Myriad Devil Ridge, who was scratching himself furiously, shouted, "This is the Myriad Poisons forest. What's so strange about seeing spiders?" Before he could finish speaking, he was also stunned, and his expression gradually became one of fear. There was nothing strange about seeing spiders outside the Myriad Poisons forest, but what if there were spiders everywhere? Not only were there spiders, but there were also scorpions, ants, poisonous frogs, snakes, and so on. The cultivators had seen all kinds of poisonous creatures before, and some they had never seen before. All of them ran out of the Myriad Poisons forest. The ground was densely packed with poisonous insects. Among the poisonous insects, there were also a few poisonous pythons that were more than 100 feet long. They flicked their forked tongues and spat out green mist. A cultivator accidentally inhaled a mouthful of it, and his face instantly turned green. He fell straight to the ground on the spot and his limbs stiffened. The poisonous insects were everywhere, and the cultivators screamed as they tried to escape. The scene was extremely chaotic. The poisonous insects were trampled to death, and the green mist they emitted caused even more people to suffer. Lu Yi had already rushed to the side on Hupu. Although he didn't know what method Hua Si had used, the poisonous creatures that had rushed out of the myriad poisons forest were clearly under her control. He really didn't know that Hua Si had such a miraculous ability. The myriad Devil Ridge cultivators were in complete chaos. Without any way to guarantee their own safety, who would have the extra energy to pay attention to Lu Yi? Only the cultivators riding on flying demonic beasts sensed Lu Ye's movement. However, there weren't many of them to begin with, and they had no way of stopping Lu Yi. They could only watch as Lu Yi continuously approached the myriad poisons forest until he rushed into it and disappeared without a trace. The myriad Devil Ridge's operation to kill Lu Yi had once again ended in failure. Last time, he had escaped into the myriad poisons forest, and this time, he had escaped into the myriad poisons forest again. History seemed to be repeating itself. The difference was that last time, he had relied on a bizarre method to directly kill his way into the myriad poisons forest. This time, however, his luck was off the charts. For some reason, the poisonous creatures in the myriad poisons forest had gone berserk, completely destroying the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators formation. However, was it really just good luck? Some people couldn't help but wonder if the poisonous creature's rampage had something to do with Lu Yi. However, no matter how they thought about it, they couldn't think of anything. At that time, Lu Yi had been a few hundred feet away from the myriad poisons forest. Other than riding on the tiger's back, he hadn't done anything else. Even if he really had some method to control the poisonous creatures, he couldn't have used it out of thin air. However, it was too much of a coincidence to say that it had nothing to do with him. Also, how did Lu Yi manage to stay in the myriad poisons forest for dozens of days without being poisoned to death? The last time he had been trapped in the myriad poisons forest, the myriad Devil Ridge had been looking forward to the day he would be poisoned to death. However, this time, no one was looking forward to anything. In the myriad poisons forest, Lu Yi hadn't rushed far on Hupo when he saw a familiar figure standing there and waving at him. Who else could it be but Hua Si? Hupo stepped forward, and Lu Yi pulled Hua Si onto his back. Hua Si's expression froze. Is it serious? Whether it was Lu Yi or Hupo, they both looked like they were riddled with wounds, especially Lu Yi. His naked upper body was covered in wounds, and his pants were stained red with blood. They're all superficial wounds. Hua Si breathed a sigh of relief. After traveling for an hour, they finally returned to the wooden house. Originally, the wooden house was covered by a large formation. Under the cover of the formation, as long as there was enough spiritual power to support it, the poisonous fog outside would not be able to invade. Lu Yi had even left behind a mother teleportation formation in the courtyard. However, the spiritual power of heaven and earth had been sealed, and the large formation had stopped working long ago. Without the formation, the poisonous fog would invade. Lu Yi had the talent tree. As long as there was enough fuel stored in the talent tree, he would be immune to all kinds of poisons. However, Hupo didn't have that ability. He couldn't ask Hua Si to stay by his side and cure his poison. Hupo can't transform, right? Hua Si asked. If Hupo could transform into the size of a cat, then Hua Si would be able to keep him by her side. That way, she wouldn't have to worry about him getting poisoned. Wait. Lu Yi connected his mind to the Spirit Stream leaderboard and looked at it. Currently, he was at the top of the Spirit Stream leaderboard. In second place was the female archer he had fought against before. In third place was a cultivator from the Grand Sky Alliance, who came from a first-rank sect in Dingzhou. His name was Han Taijun. However, Lu Yi didn't have any dealings with him. That didn't matter. He just needed to find someone who had dealings with him to pass on a message. Right now, he couldn't use spiritual power in the Spirit Stream battlefield, so Hupo couldn't transform at will. However, it was different in the battle arena. The battle arena wasn't affected by the magnetic field. After searching through his battlefield imprint, he sent out a dozen or so messages. A moment later, the battle imprint sent out a message. Someone on the Spirit Stream leaderboard wanted to challenge him. Lu Yi accepted the challenge. After choosing the terrain, his figure quickly disappeared. In the battle arena, Lu Yi and the dark green Hu Po appeared at the same time. In front of them stood a young man with a fierce aura. Lu Yi cupped his hands. "Are you fellow Taoist Han Taijun?" "That's me." "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi thanked him. This was the disadvantage of being at the top of the Spirit Stream leaderboard. He couldn't take the initiative to challenge others. He could only wait for others to challenge him. Therefore, if he wanted to enter the battle arena, he had to find someone to help him. "Fellow Taoist, Yi is too polite. I've heard about what happened before. How is your current situation? Do you need help? I hid in the Myriad Poison Forest again. Those people from the Myriad Demon Ridge can't do anything to me." Han Taijun had a look of admiration. "Fellow Taoist is amazing." As the two of them spoke, Hu Po shook his body. Monster essence surged, and his sturdy body quickly shrank. He turned into the size of a cat and lightly jumped onto Lu Ye's shoulder. Han Taijun quickly left. He didn't really challenge Lu Yi to compete with him on the leaderboard. Instead, Lu Yi wanted to enter the battle arena. Before leaving, the two of them exchanged battle imprints. Lu Yi felt that he would have to trouble the other party in the future. With each other's battle imprints, they could directly communicate with each other. It was better than having someone else pass on messages. A moment later, Lu Yi also left the battle arena. Hua Xi grabbed Hu Po and first detoxified his poison. Then, she began to treat Lu Ye's injuries. However, because she couldn't use her spiritual power, she couldn't use many healing methods. Fortunately, Lu Ye's physique was strong. Although he had suffered many injuries, they were all superficial. After applying some healing medicine and resting for a few days, he would naturally recover. The noise in the outside world calmed down once more. Now that the Third Sacred Academy's encampment had been breached, the Myriad Demon Ridge had no other means to force Lu Yi to leave the Myriad Poison Forest. Lu Yi inwardly swore that he wouldn't leave the Myriad Poison Forest until he cultivated to the 9th Heaven stage. With his current foundation, if he advanced to the 9th Heaven stage, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the Spirit Stream battlefield. At that time, the Myriad Demon Ridge wouldn't be able to do anything to him. In the wooden house, Lu Yi was recuperating while reading the saber art experience that his third senior brother had entrusted to him from Xiao Changhe. He had gained a lot. Chapter 4:17. From what was recorded in the saber technique notes, third senior brother Xiao Xinghe's spirit artifact was also a saber, but it was a very exaggerated large saber, which was not the same type as Lu Ye's mountain saber. Therefore, many of Xiao Xinghe's experiences in saber technique were not suitable for Lu Yi. However, there were also many similarities. After all, regardless of the style, everyone practiced saber technique. These common saber techniques were undoubtedly what Lu Yi needed the most at the moment. As for those that were not, he could also learn a thing or two from them. As the saying goes, stones from other mountains can be used to polish jade. To be honest, Lu Ye's cultivation path was not complete because ever since he opened his spirit aperture, he had been groping around on his own. In the sect, whether it was Shui Yuan, the sect master, or Madame Yun, they could not provide much help to him. Especially in the area of saber techniques, no one had ever taught him systematically and perfectly. Under normal circumstances, when a cultivator entered a sect, there would be instructors to guide their cultivation. For example, if Lu Yi wanted to practice saber techniques, then there would be instructors with superb saber techniques to teach him all kinds of experiences. But how could the Jade Blood sect have such conditions? When Lu Yi entered the Jade Blood sect, there were only 2 people in the entire sect. Including him, there were only 3. Shui Yuan was a medical cultivator, and the sect master was a law cultivator. None of them used sabers. His attainments in saber techniques were all accumulated by himself. There was no perfect system or powerful method. It was completely based on how convenient it was to kill and defeat the enemy. This was a pure killing technique, but it wasn't a bad thing. When facing an enemy weaker than oneself, one could often avoid the enemy in the shortest amount of time. Correspondingly, if one lacked some explosive killing moves, it would be very difficult to deal with an enemy whose strength was equal to or stronger than oneself. Without a killer move, this was Lu Ye's shortcoming. The previous battle with Shi Guang made Lu Ye realize this, so after that, he had been practicing the flash saber technique hard, but he had not been able to perfect this saber technique until now. The saber technique experience that third senior brother Xiao Xinghe had sent over had undoubtedly given him a lot of inspiration, which was what he needed most right now. If it weren't for the sudden outburst of the magnetic field, Xiao Xinghe would have sent Lu Yi to the Azure Arch City so that he could personally guide her. However, the outburst of the magnetic field had cut off the teleportation between the 9 states and the Spirit Stream battlefield. Left with no other choice, Xiao Xinghe could only pass on his insights to Lu Yi. On the 3rd floor of the wooden house, Lu Yi sat cross-legged. His hands were clenched into fists, palms facing upwards. The Pan Mountain saber was in his hands. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, feeling the long saber in his hand as he breathed. This was a way of cultivation. A spirit weapon had a spirit, especially a spirit weapon that had accompanied its master in battle and killed enemies for a long time. It was no longer just a spirit weapon, but a partner that its master could entrust his life to. Using this special method of cultivation, Lu Yi was able to form a miraculous connection with the Pan Mountain saber. This was the so-called man and saber connection. That was what was written in third senior brother's saber technique notes. However, Lu Yi had always felt that this matter was somewhat unfathomable. After all, spirit artifacts were inanimate objects. How could they have any sort of resonance with him? Lu Yi decided to give it a try. He planned to cultivate like this for a few days and see the result. If it really didn't work, he would find an opportunity to ask his third senior brother for advice. The Pan Mountain saber undoubtedly met his requirements. Since Lu Yi embarked on the path of cultivation, he had only used a total of 3 spirit artifacts. One was Manager Yang's sword, and the other was the saber he obtained from killing enemies in Clear Cloud Mountain. That saber had a similar appearance to the Pan Mountain saber, but its grade was too low and had been destroyed in the Battle of Golden Light Peak. After the Battle of Golden Light Peak, Lu Yi bought the Pan Mountain saber from the Tianji treasure house. At that time, he was only a 5th-order cultivator. Today, this long saber had been with him for more than a year and had killed countless enemies. It could be said that this saber was extremely convenient for Lu Yi. Even if his cultivation increased in the future, and he had to change to a higher-grade spirit artifact, he was prepared to buy a similar long saber. Inside the wooden house, Lu Ye's chest rose and fell as he breathed in and out. At first, he didn't feel anything special, but as time passed, Lu Yi actually had a subtle feeling that the Pan Mountain saber in his hand was breathing in and out with his breathing. At first, this feeling was very weak, but gradually, it became stronger. The long saber seemed to have a life of its own. Until a certain moment, a cold light flashed in the dim wooden house, accompanied by the sound of the saber being unsheathed. Lu Yi was suddenly awakened. Looking down, he had unsheathed the Pan Mountain saber at some point. At this moment, the Pan Mountain saber gave him a different feeling. It was no longer an inanimate object used to kill enemies. Holding the saber's hilt, Lu Yi felt as if it was an extension of his body. Pulling out the Pan Mountain saber, Lu Yi casually swung it a few times. It was smoother than before, like an extension of his arm. Yes, this was the feeling. Was this the so-called man and saber in harmony? Lu Yi clicked his tongue in amazement. He didn't expect that what his third senior brother had said in the saber technique was true. He had originally only wanted to try his hand at cultivating, but in the end, he had achieved it so easily. Although his cultivation didn't increase, nor did he open any spirit apertures, Lu Yi knew that he had taken a big step forward on the path of saber technique. There seemed to be something else. Lu Yi muttered to himself for a moment, then returned the saber to its sheath. Closing his eyes, he casually threw the Pan Mountain saber far away and breathed in and out. Because he had thrown the Pan Mountain saber with his eyes closed, he didn't know where it was. But even with his eyes closed, he could vaguely sense the saber's existence. He stood up and walked forward step by step. After taking 7 steps, he bent his waist and reached out with his hand. The Pan Mountain saber was in his hand. The first step of saber technique cultivation had been completed. Lu Yi originally thought that not much time had passed, but when he felt the hunger in his stomach and asked Hua Si, he found out that 3 days had passed in the blink of an eye. Lu Yi almost suspected that this woman was lying to him because he hadn't noticed the passage of time at all. But after asking others, he found out that Hua Si hadn't lied to him. 3 days had really passed. Perhaps Lu Ye's distrust had caused Hua Si to become angry, but she had prepared a table full of terrifying-looking food for him. Under Hua Si's smiling gaze, Lu Yi had no choice but to bite the bullet and finish everything on the table. Hupa looked at him with sympathy. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Lu Yi returned to the 3rd floor and sat down cross-legged. Holding the Pan Mountain saber with both hands, he closed his eyes and breathed in and out. After attaining the connection between man and saber, it didn't mean that he could sit back and relax. Instead, he had to use this method to deepen his connection with his saber. The deeper the connection between man and saber, the more powerful the saber's killing power would be. Lu Yi decided that if he had the chance in the future, he would spend 2 hours every day doing this kind of cultivation. In any case, he didn't need to breathe on his own when cultivating, so he could use it in this aspect. 2 hours later, Lu Yi walked down from the 3rd floor and arrived at the small courtyard outside the house. Hua Si was nowhere to be seen. This woman must have hidden somewhere to cultivate. Lu Yi was actually curious about her cultivation method. Ever since she came to the Myriad Poisons Forest, her cultivation had advanced at lightning speed. Now Lu Yi suspected that she wasn't far from reaching the 9th heaven. Standing in the small courtyard, Lu Yi took out his mountain pan saber and held it in his right hand, assuming a stance. Following the guidance of 3rd senior brother's saber technique insights, Lu Ye's blood and qi surged. Following his will, a huge amount of blood and qi gathered in his right arm that held the saber, then he slashed down. He couldn't use the spiritual power in his body, so the power of this slash couldn't be considered strong. However, Lu Yi could clearly feel that this slash was faster and stronger than his normal slash. So that's how it is. He had been unable to perfect the flash saber technique before because he always felt that something was missing. After reading 3rd senior brother's insights, he finally understood what he was missing. What he lacked was the ability to use the power of his blood and qi. Previously, when he swung the saber, he relied on his own strength and spiritual power to infuse the spirit tool. The former was the capital brought by his physique, while the latter was instinct. This was because cultivators relied on their own spiritual power to fight with their enemies. A cultivator without spiritual power was an ordinary person with a stronger physique. Only now did Lu Yi realize that he had overlooked a very important problem. He relied too heavily on his spiritual power and neglected the power of his body. If the power contained in the flash saber technique was 10 points, then spiritual power would take up at least 80% of it. His own strength would only take up 20% or even 10%. There was no way to achieve a balance, so the flash saber technique was incomplete. Because the power of the slash wasn't enough, he couldn't control it. If he could use 40% or even 50% of his strength, then the flash saber technique would be perfect. The explosive power would also increase explosively. How could he use his own strength more effectively? Blood transference. The source of strength was blood and qi. Therefore, body cultivators were generally stronger than cultivators of other factions because their blood and qi were abundant. Why was Lu Yi stronger than ordinary body cultivators? Because his blood and qi were more abundant than ordinary body cultivators. But now, he had a mountain of treasures, but he didn't know how to use it. He had wasted a huge amount of his blood and qi. The blood transference technique was to solve this problem. It had to be said that third senior brother had imperceptibly helped Lu Yi a lot by sending his saber technique cultivation note. Moreover, now was the best time to cultivate the blood transference technique. Because the magnetic field was in chaos and the world's spiritual energy was confined, even the spiritual power in a cultivator's body couldn't flow. Lu Yi could only rely on his own blood and qi. In such an environment, he could better and more directly feel the flow of his blood and qi. Immersing his mind, he tried to concentrate his blood and qi on his saber-wielding right arm. In a short moment, his entire right arm turned red and the temperature of his right arm rose. Only when Lu Yi felt that he couldn't continue did he slash out. Suddenly, a blood-red blade flashed. It wasn't a sign of spiritual power, but a sign of blood and qi bursting out. The power of this slash was at least 50% stronger than the previous slash. Chapter 4:18. Lu Ye's right arm, which was holding the knife, became sore and swollen. The skin of his entire right arm was like a roasted shrimp shell, incomparably red and steaming. His entire right arm was sore, swollen, and trembling uncontrollably. Lu Yi clenched his fist, and repeated this process many times before his right arm slowly recovered. Recalling the saber strike just now, Lu Yi felt as if the dark clouds had parted to reveal the bright moon. For a long time, his cultivation had relied on his own efforts and fumbling. He did not know what was right or wrong. His third senior brother's saber cultivation experience had undoubtedly pointed out a clear path for him. After a cup of tea's time, Lu Yi felt that his right arm had completely recovered, so he slashed out again just like before. 4 to 6 hours later, Lu Yi switched the saber in his right hand to the saber in his left and continued to practice. Saber after saber, he hacked down meticulously. At night, when Hua Xi returned from her cultivation outside, she saw Lu Yi standing in the courtyard, his arms hanging down naturally. The Pan Mountain blade was stabbed into the ground by his feet. Their eyes met and Lu Yi whispered, "Help!" Hua Xi took a closer look and saw that his arms were swollen to the size of his thighs. She was shocked. Zhang Xian hurriedly rushed forward to check on Lu Yi, and after confirming that it was just a blood clot and nothing serious, he finally relaxed. He then asked Lu Yi the reason why he was in such a wretched state, and upon learning that the latter had caused him to be in such a sorry state in order to cultivate his saber arts, he felt helpless. Because she had gathered too much qi and blood and didn't disperse it in time, causing her arms to swell, it wasn't a big problem. After being patted and rubbed by Hua Xi to stimulate blood circulation, Lu Ye's arms returned to normal in just one night. It was the same the next day. However, after suffering a loss, Lu Yi would pay more attention when practicing his saber art. Therefore, the situation was better than the first day. In the following days, Lu Yi cultivated his saber skills during the day and had Hua Xi treat him at night. As his saber skills improved day by day, the after effects of using the blood transfer technique also decreased. One day, as Hua Xi was treating Lu Ye's arms, she suddenly asked, "Haven't you been paying attention to the spirit stream list lately?" "No, why?" Previously, he had been paying attention to the spirit stream list, but since he had become the spirit stream list's #1, he did not pay much attention to it, as there were very few people who could threaten his position on the list. Take a look. Lu Ye's mind was connected to the spirit stream list. From the top, there were some changes on the list, some familiar names, some names that had disappeared. By the looks of it, they had all advanced to the Cloud River. Lu Ye continued to look down, and when he reached the 70th rank, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. This was because only a few of the 30 people ranked between 40th and 70th were from Hautian Alliance. The rest were all from Myriad Devil Ridge. This situation seemed familiar. Loses spirit streams s, yezes loses s lu yezes lose li s name s lon z. Lu ling li time spirit lu yi li. Did you see that? Hua Si asked. When did she start to make the list? Yesterday. Lu Yi was surprised. In just one day, he had reached the 38th position on the spirit stream list. This speed was not the least bit inferior to his previous record. In fact, it was even faster. That person should be very strong. Be careful. There's a high chance that he's targeting you. Hua Si reminded. Boundless Island. Lu Yi fell into deep thought. He seemed to have had some dealings with someone from this force. If he remembered correctly, Luo Ji, whom he had met in the sky-splitting gorge, was from the Boundless Island. As expected of a first-grade sect, they had a solid foundation. Putting aside Luo Ji, who practiced a heaven-class cultivation technique, Lan Zi, who suddenly popped out of nowhere. Hua Si had said that there was a high chance that this person was targeting him, and it was not without reason. In the past, the Myriad Devil Ridge had repeatedly targeted him, and the various powers had tried to surround and kill him. However, they had failed each time. Now that he was hiding in the Myriad Poisons forest, the Myriad Devil Ridge was powerless to do anything to him. If they wanted to kill him, they would have to challenge him through the Spirit Stream list. However, Lu Ye's strength at the top of the Spirit Stream ranking was not just for show. Almost all of the mighty ones from the Myriad Demons Ridge, who were on the Spirit Stream ranking, had been killed by him. Even a mighty one like Shi Guang was no match for Lu Yi. Perhaps only the dead Yan Xing had the qualifications to defeat Lu Yi. At this juncture, Lan Zi had suddenly appeared on the Myriad Devil Ridge's side. This woman's method of ranking was exactly the same as Lu Ye's. She had challenged the experts of the Grand Heaven Alliance, who were ranked above her one by one. The Grand Heaven Alliance had no power to fight back. In just one day, she had reached the 38th position. While Lu Yi and Hua Si were talking, Lan Zi's ranking jumped up by 2 places, occupying the 36th position. The name of the person who had been in the 36th position suddenly disappeared without a trace. Obviously, he had died in battle. Imitating Lu Ye's method of ranking, and choosing such a subtle time, no one would believe that she was not targeting Lu Yi. There are still 7 or 8 days before the Tianji bestowment, right? Hua Si asked again. Lu Yi calculated and nodded. 7 days. It had been 23 days since the Tianji bestowment's baptism. Every time he experienced the Tianji bestowment's baptism, Lu Ye's strength would increase significantly. Therefore, if this Lan Zi was really targeting him, she would definitely challenge Lu Yi before the Tianji bestowment's baptism. She would definitely not give him a chance to continue growing stronger. Judging by the speed at which this woman was climbing the rankings, she would most likely have the qualifications to challenge Lu Yi in the next 2 days. Lu Yi was suddenly looking forward to it. This was because he could not find an opponent to test his strength in the entire Spirit Stream battlefield. It was easy for him to fight. As long as he left the forest of 1,000 poisons and exposed his whereabouts, countless Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators would flock over. However, that would definitely be a situation where many cultivators would gang up on him. However, it would be difficult for him to fight one-on-one. The best way to test one's strength was to fight a powerful cultivator one-on-one. Since this Lan Zi could climb the rankings so quickly, her strength was definitely not weak. Lu Yi had been cultivating his saber techniques recently and had gained quite a bit of insight. However, cultivation was still only cultivation. The results of cultivation still depended on one's performance in actual combat. If this Lan Zi was really strong enough, she would be a very good whetstone. At this time, the rising star, Lan Zi, had attracted the attention of countless cultivators from both sides. Before Lu Ye's sudden appearance, no one had ever killed so many opponents while challenging the spirit stream rankings. Moreover, the way he climbed the rankings was to challenge them one by one. This undoubtedly annoyed the myriad Devil Ridge. However, this woman had been unstoppable all the way to the top of the spirit stream rankings. Many of the myriad Devil Ridge's actions against her had all ended in failure. Lu Ye of the Jade Blood sect had become a huge mountain that pressed down on the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators, making it difficult for them to breathe. However, a similar talent had appeared on the myriad Devil Ridge's side today. The speed at which she climbed the rankings was not slower than Lu Ye's. In fact, she was even faster. Many Grand Sky Alliance cultivators had died at her hands. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting for Lan Zi to have the qualifications to challenge the top of the Spirit Stream rankings. They were waiting for the two of them to fight it out and see who was the strongest cultivator in the current generation of the Spirit Stream realm. In the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Lu Yi was still cultivating his saber technique. Suddenly, a message came from the battlefield imprint. Lu Yi looked down and found that it was a message from Han Taijun. Be careful of that woman. She's very strong. She has a lot of flowers. Lu Yi understood that she was very strong. Lan Zi's speed on the leaderboard was very fast, so Lu Yi had never underestimated her. But a lot of flowers. What did that mean? Moreover, judging from Han Tiejuan's words, it seemed that he had already fought with Lan Zi. Lu Yi checked the Spirit Stream rankings. Sure enough, Han Taijun was originally ranked 3rd, but now he had run to 5th place. Lan Zi had taken his 3rd place. Are you okay? Lu Yi asked. I'm heavily injured. Amazing. I'm heavily injured. Anyway, you have to be careful of that woman. She might not be weaker than you. I couldn't force her to use her full strength. From the beginning to the end, I felt that she was just playing a game when fighting me. Understood. After ending the conversation with Han Taijun, Lu Yi thought for a moment and sent a message to Hua Ci. He did not cultivate his saber techniques anymore. Although after these days of cultivation, his arms would not swell like on the first day. However, this kind of cultivation consumed a lot of his physical strength. He did not know when Lan Zi would come to challenge him, so he had to maintain his condition. Hua Ci quickly returned and helped him adjust his arms. Lu Yi returned to the 3rd floor and sat down cross-legged. He swallowed a few spirit pills, then placed the mountain saber on his knees and slowly breathed in and out. Lan Zi had already rushed to the 3rd place on the Spirit Stream rankings. The highly anticipated battle was about to begin. At this moment, both the cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance and the myriad Devil Ridge were paying attention to the Spirit Stream rankings. They wanted to know who was the strongest cultivator on their side. Lu Yi and Lan Zi's battle hadn't even started yet, and all sorts of information were already flying around. The myriad Devil Ridge's side clamored that Lu Ye had already been baptized by the heavens, so this battle was not fair to Lan Zi. The Grand Heaven Alliance's side immediately retorted. Lan Zi's cultivation was at the 9th heaven, while Lu Ye's was only at the 8th heaven. It was indeed unfair. After these words were spread, the myriad Devil Ridge's side was immediately silenced. They suddenly realized a terrifying fact. That Lu Ye was still at the 8th heaven. Therefore, even if he lost this battle, it could not prove that Lan Zi was the strongest in the Spirit Stream realm. That was because Lu Ye could still advance to the 9th heaven and have a chance to make a comeback. On the other hand, if Lan Zi lost, it would be a true loss. If the 9th heaven could not beat the 8th heaven, then when Lu Ye advanced to the 9th heaven, would he still be a match? Therefore, there was only one chance. If Lan Zi could not reach the top of the spirit stream rankings this time, then he would forever be suppressed by Lu Yi. Just as the information was flying around in the outside world, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes in the wooden house. The battlefield imprint moved again, and he immersed his consciousness to investigate. The challenge of the spirit stream rankings had begun. Chapter 419. Within the wooden hut, Lu Yi accepted the challenge and chose the location of the arena. Suddenly, a heavenly will descended, and the two of them quickly disappeared. Once again, the arena was only a few dozen meters in radius. Lu Yi steadied himself and waited for the white light in his field of vision to dissipate before looking at his opponent. On the other side of the arena, a tall woman dressed in purple stood there silently. Her appearance was undoubtedly very beautiful, and her figure was also excellent. Her entire person exuded a tranquil and elegant aura. This woman's name was Lan Zi, and she was dressed in purple, which was quite fitting. Lu Yi looked down and raised his eyebrows imperceptibly. He was sizing up his opponent, and she was sizing him up as well. As the strongest cultivators from both sides, it wasn't that they were friends, but rather, it was an instinct to observe one's opponent before a battle. Lan Zi didn't seem to have any spirit tools on her. Lu Yi wondered if she was a spell cultivator. However, based on her attire, that didn't seem to be the case. Regardless of whether she was or not, he would know once he gave it a try. The weapon box at his waist buzzed, and 9 streaks of light shot towards Lan Zi like ferocious tigers. In the blink of an eye, they had covered more than half of the distance between them. Lan Zi raised her hand and pointed forward. A streak of pure spiritual energy shot out in the form of a spiritual energy thread. This wasn't a spell technique, but rather a precise control of one's spiritual energy. However, its power wasn't inferior to any spell technique. What was even more surprising was that after this line of spiritual energy flew out, it suddenly split into 9 and attacked 9 streams of light. A series of clanging sounds rang out as Lu Yi's 9 imperial tools were all blocked. Not only that, but even more streaks of spiritual energy shot out from the other side, one after another. Some of the streaks of spiritual energy didn't change, while others suddenly split. In an instant, the space in front of Lu Yi was covered by countless streaks of spiritual energy, forming a large net that descended towards him. This net of spiritual energy sealed the heavens and locked down the earth, making it impossible for Lu Yi to dodge. He unsheathed his mountain plate saber and slashed forward. A fiery red streak of light flashed past, and a hole appeared in the net of spiritual energy surrounding Lu Yi. Lu Yi shot out like an arrow towards Lan Zi. His opponent seemed to be a magic cultivator, so Lu Yi naturally wanted to fight her in close combat. Only then could he display his advantage. However, Lu Yi had just rushed out when he heard a clear and melodious clanging sound. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen streaks of light had already shot towards him. Those streaks of light were all flying swords. A Dharma cultivator driving a flying sword? This was not common. Lu Yi was not alarmed. Under the control of his mind, the 9 imperial equipment around him welcomed the flying swords. At the same time, his footsteps did not stop as he continued to charge forward. Clanking sounds could be heard as the imperial equipment of both sides clashed in midair, sparks flying everywhere. In the blink of an eye, Lu Yi was already 30 meters away from Lan Zi. His pan mountain blade was wrapped in flames, and his killing intent was bursting out. Lan Zi, who was standing still, raised her hand and grabbed at the air. A huge sword appeared in her hand. Lu Yi did not even see how the sword appeared. This was a 2-handed greatsword. It was much wider and heavier than a normal longsword. Being held in the hands of a woman like Lan Zi would undoubtedly create a strong visual impact. She gripped the hilt of her sword with both hands and faced Lu Yi's slash with her sword. Boom! Waves of air swept across the battlefield. In the instant that spiritual energy went berserk, Lu Yi's body shook and stabilized. On the other side, Lan Zi also slightly arched her body and did not retreat a single step. This surprised Lu Yi, because there had never been a spirit stream realm cultivator who could take one of his attacks without retreating. Even a physique cultivator of the Nine Heavens realm would find it difficult to do so. However, such a beautiful and tall woman was able to do it. This woman was definitely not a Dharma cultivator. What made Lu Yi even more concerned was that this woman had a faint smile on her face from the beginning to the end. Her silent demeanor gave off a sense of superiority. Han Taijun was right. This woman had a lot of tricks up her sleeve. Moreover, she was facing the battle with a playful attitude. The two of them were in a deadlock at close range. The distance between them was less than 10 meters. Their eyes met, and the red and blue spiritual energy clashed fiercely under their respective control. Normally, in this situation, it was time for the Sunshine Spirit Rune to appear. The Pan Mountain Saber flashed with a dazzling light. At the same time, Lu Yi suddenly felt an irresistible force in front of him. Under the push of that violent force, he actually floated back several meters. At the same time, Lan Zi took advantage of the momentum to retreat and closed her eyes tightly. Ding ding dang dang, around the two of them, the Imperial equipment and flying sword were still constantly clashing. Even when the saber and sword clashed, the confrontation did not stop. This was undoubtedly a great test of a person's mind. Lu Ye's mind was strong because his divine soul had been cleansed in the soul cleansing pool, and then he had taken a lot of soul cleansing water. However, the strength of Lan Zi's mind was not inferior to Lu Ye's. This was somewhat inconceivable. Just as the two of them were retreating, a flying sword broke through the blockade of Lu Ye's imperial equipment and silently slashed at him. Before Lu Yi landed on the ground, he didn't even look and swung his saber. The powerful destructive force made the flying sword dim, and it flew directly to the edge of the battlefield. The Sunshine Spirit Rune, which had always been successful, did not work this time. Lan Zi's reaction was too fast. The moment she sensed that something was wrong, she pushed Lu Yi away and closed her eyes. When the light dissipated, the two figures charged at each other at the same time. Once again, they fiercely collided. It was as if two mountains had collided. The big sword and the long saber had different colored lights attached to them. They were entangled together, and killing intent was bursting out. Lu Ye's eyes narrowed. When he was pushed away just now, he sensed that something was wrong. This woman's strength was a little too strong. At this moment, he felt it even more clearly. Every time the saber and sword clashed, the arm holding the saber trembled slightly, and the web between his thumb and forefinger gradually became numb. He was simply in disbelief. In a competition of strength, he actually lost to a woman. Looking at her chi and blood, it was not to an outrageous extent. How could she erupt with such powerful strength? During the confrontation, Lu Yi thought of a possibility and immediately constructed the Insight Spirit Rune in his eyes. Under the Insight Spirit Rune, he finally saw it clearly. In terms of chi and blood, Lan Zi was indeed inferior to him. However, this woman was clearly proficient in the blood-transferring art. Every time the big sword slashed down, she could perfectly unleash all of her strength. That was why her strength was stronger than his. This was something that Lu Yi could not achieve. Although he had practiced the blood-transferring art for a few days, he was far from being as skilled as her. If Lu Ye's strength was 100, then Lan Zi's was at most 70 or 80. However, if Lu Yi didn't use the blood transfer technique, he could only use half of his strength. If he used the blood transfer technique, he could be on par with Lan Zi, but he couldn't be as skilled as Lan Zi. On the other hand, Lan Zi could unleash all of her strength at any time. Lu Yi did not dare to use the blood-transferring art casually. The battle had just begun, and it was unwise to rashly use his trump card before figuring out the opponent's strength. The so-called trump card was something that could determine the outcome of the battle with a single strike. Although Lu Ye's strength was inferior to his opponent's, he still had spiritual tattoos that he could use. wind travel, heavy pressure, sharp edge, and various other spiritual tattoos were activated, which caused Lan Zi to suffer a lot. For a time, the two of them were locked in battle. Hupa wandered around the edge of the battlefield, while Yi hid underground. Neither of them participated in this battle. One spirit and one tiger knew what Lu Yi was thinking. It was rare to meet such an opponent, so he naturally wanted to fight to his heart's content and use this opportunity to train himself. Otherwise, if they all attacked together, it would be meaningless even if they won. The Imperial equipment and flying swords clashing in the sky gradually quieted down. Both Lu Yi and Lan Zi had sensed the opponent's strength. Facing such an opponent, neither of them could afford to be distracted, so they both withdrew their Imperial equipment and flying swords. Another fierce collision occurred. The heavy pressure spirit tattoo caused Lan Zi's body to shrink and almost kneel on the ground. Taking advantage of his opponent's momentary carelessness, Lu Ye's qi and blood madly gathered in his right arm. In an instant, his entire right arm swelled up and his skin turned red. Spirit light flashed on the mountain pan saber, and double sharpness was enhanced. A flash. He got it! The saber slashed at Lan Zi's waist. With the explosive power of a flash and the enhancement of the double sharpness spirit tattoo, no one in the spirit stream realm could block this attack. The most likely outcome for Lan Zi was to be cut in half and die on the spot. However, in the next moment, Lu Yi realized something was wrong. The saber had indeed hit Lan Zi, but his opponent's body was not cut in half. The moment the saber fell, Lu Yi clearly saw a thick layer of barrier wrap around Lan Zi. The powerful force sent Lan Zi flying. His body flipped a few times in the air before landing in a sorry state. However, Lu Yi also felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. In the instant that Lan Zi was sent flying, that huge sword had pierced into his body, sinking 3 inches into his flesh. If he had not sent Lan Zi flying, that sword would have pierced right through him. When such a large sword stabbed into the body, the wounds caused by it were extremely impressive. Lu Ye's abdomen immediately spurted blood, and he staggered back. He hurriedly constructed a blood-stained spirit tattoo on his chest, and the blood that gushed out gathered under the guidance of the spirit tattoo. Standing on the spot, Lu Yi frowned and looked at the woman on the other side. He couldn't understand what kind of defense that layer of protection was. It was able to block his attack, which was enhanced by the sharpness spirit tattoo and activated the blood transfer technique. He didn't see any signs of Lan Zi activating a spirit artifact, which meant that the layer of protection was her own ability. This was troublesome. He couldn't even break the other party's defense with a flash. How was he going to kill her? On the other side, Lan Zi was half-crouching, her large sword stabbed into the ground. Her feet plowed 2 lines of marks in the arena, and she barely didn't fall down. Although she didn't know what method she used to block that fatal attack and avoid the fate of being cut in half by Lu Ye's saber, the violent impact couldn't be mitigated. At this moment, blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. She supported herself with her long sword and slowly stood up. Her eyes curiously looked at Lu Yi, as if she wanted to re-evaluate him. Chapter 420. It was undeniable that Lan Zi was very strong. Her strength was the same as Lu Ye's, both of them exceeding the spirit stream stage. Perhaps only the 3 malignant tumors of the spirit stream stage from a few months ago had the qualifications to surpass them. However, those 3 had all been at the spirit stream stage for more than a decade, and time had given them the ability to become powerful. Their situation was different from Lu Yi and Lan Zi's. Powerful people had their own secrets, and Lan Zi naturally had her own as well. It was a secret that no one could know. Although she was only at the spirit stream stage, her vision far exceeded that of the spirit stream stage, and the various techniques she had mastered were not something that the spirit stream stage could compare to. She raised her thumb and wiped the corner of her mouth, then looked down. That's right, she was bleeding. She couldn't figure out how there could be a spirit stream stage cultivator in this world who could hurt her. The faint smile on her face disappeared, and her expression became serious. She raised her large sword and held the hilt in front of her with both hands. In an instant, the charming woman gave off a feeling that she was impregnable. It was as long as she stood there, no attack could knock her down. Lu Yi naturally wouldn't give her time to breathe. He suddenly exerted force with his feet, and 2 pits immediately appeared on the ground. He left behind afterimages as he rushed toward Lan Zi. Before he even got close, Lu Yi saw the woman suddenly separate her hands, and the large sword in front of her suddenly turned into 2 long swords. This large sword was actually a combination of 2 long swords. Lu Yi was surprised. This woman really had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. However, this didn't affect his speed and determination to kill her. The distance between them quickly closed. Lan Zi suddenly assumed a strange posture. One of the 2 long swords was pointed to the sky and the other to the ground. Her graceful and tall body spun slightly, and the sword slashed out. It met Lu Ye's blade head-on. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions, and Lu Ye's forward momentum was stopped. However, the power transmitted from the spirit weapon made Lu Yi realize one thing, and that was that the power contained in his opponent's sword had weakened. Because it was clear that he had the upper hand in this collision. He had a bad feeling and didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue. Instead, he took a step back. Just as he took this step back, Lan Zi's body spun slightly again, and the other long sword came crashing down. Clang! Lu Yi took another step back. Clang, clang, clang! With every sound, Lu Yi had to take a step back. Lan Zi, who had a huge sword in her hand, was extremely powerful, but her attacks were clumsy. Now that the great sword had turned into 2 swords, the strength was somewhat restrained, but the agility and speed of the attack were incomparable to before. Lan Zi had 2 different sword styles, so her fighting style was completely different. What was shocking was that she could perfectly control these 2 styles and switch between them as she pleased. This woman was tall and slender to begin with, and the longsword in her hand was half a foot longer than an ordinary longsword. With her as the center, she was able to attack with a radius of tens of feet. That sword light flashed out, slashing through the void and carrying a sharp killing intent. Lu Yi suddenly thought of a scene. If this woman was surrounded by a large number of enemies, with this move, she would be able to wipe them all out. Now, wherever she went, it was as if she had set off a storm of death. Initially, Lu Yi was still able to block every attack, but as he kept retreating, the speed of his opponent's body became faster and faster, and the frequency of her attacks became higher and higher. After retreating for a dozen steps, Lu Yi was unable to keep up with the opponent's rhythm. Often, out of the 5 sword strikes, he would only be able to block 4, and there was still 1 sword that would definitely hit him. Fortunately, he could still activate the defensive spirit rune, but even so, he could only passively defend. After retreating for another dozen steps, Lan Zi's attack speed increased again, and the clanging sounds of the sword and saber clashing were dense and incessant. Accompanied by the light of the defensive spirit rune shattering, there was also the scene of blood splattering. In just a few breaths' time, Lu Ye's body had more than a dozen wounds of varying depths. He knew that he could not retreat anymore. The battlefield was only so big, and once he retreated to the edge, he would be in a situation where he could no longer retreat. When the storm of death swept over, if he could not block it, he would probably be sliced into pieces in an instant. Should he use flash? He had already used it once just now, and even with the enhancement of the dual sharpness spirit rune, he still could not break through the other party's layer of defense. Lu Yi still did not understand how the other party had blocked that attack, and what was with that layer of defense. Before figuring this out, it was definitely not a good idea to use flash rashly. With a thought, the Pan Mountain saber in Lu Ye's hand flashed with spirit light. His retreating figure suddenly stopped, and he charged forward. Blood splattered, and at this moment, the defensive spirit rune that had just been formed shattered. Several more wounds appeared on Lu Ye's body, and his flesh was torn apart. However, Lu Ye's saber also landed on Lan Zi's body. The moment the saber touched her body, Lu Ye's eyes were enhanced by the Insight Spirit rune, and he was more spirited than ever. That invisible layer of defense appeared again, blocking the saber. However, after blocking the saber, the defense disappeared. It was extremely strange. Even with the Insight Spirit rune in his eyes, Lu Yi could not see what the defense was for a moment. Lu Yi forced Lan Zi to retreat with his saber, and the woman floated more than 10 feet away. She stood on the spot and pointed her 2 swords at Lu Yi, while the other was behind her back. Compared to Lu Ye's sorry state, Lan Zi was undoubtedly much calmer. At the very least, she had no injuries on her body. On the other hand, Lu Ye's clothes were somewhat tattered, and his entire body was wrapped in a thick layer of blood qi. Ever since he challenged the spirit stream list, Lu Yi had never been in such a sorry state. The woman in front of him was definitely the strongest person he had ever met in the spirit stream realm. Lan Zi finally realized that something was wrong. Lu Yi had suffered so many injuries, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. Moreover, the more serious his injuries were, the thicker the blood qi shrouding his body. Lan Zi tilted her head, looking puzzled. The tall and charming woman looked a little silly when she put on such an expression. In her eyes, Lu Yi was like an injured ferocious beast, and the ferocity hidden in his bones had been completely stimulated. The 2 figures flashed at the same time, and in the next instant, the 2 people who had disappeared reappeared at the same time. Their sabers and swords clashed. Lan Zi let out a cry of surprise. The power that Lu Yi displayed this time was much greater than before, and his speed was also much faster than before. The blood-stained spirit pattern was showing its effect. In the previous confrontation, Lu Yi had been slashed by this woman to the point of doubting his life. Although he had constructed the blood-stained spirit pattern, it would take time to take effect, and the results would not be seen immediately. At this point, however much blood Lu Yi had lost, the blood-stained spirit pattern would increase his strength. The blood qi that shrouded his body was the manifestation of the blood-stained spirit pattern. The mountain pan saber was almost dancing into a ball of saber light, while Lan Zi's 2 swords were indescribably fast. At this moment, in terms of strength, Lu Yi undoubtedly had the absolute advantage, because every time they clashed, his swords would be bent back. However, in terms of speed, even with the support of the blood-stained spirit pattern, Lu Yi was still no match for Lan Zi. With 2 swords in hand, Lan Zi stabbed at him from all sorts of unbelievable angles, causing more and more wounds to appear on Lu Ye's body. The mountain pan saber kept slashing at Lan Zi's body, but every time, an invisible barrier appeared on the surface of Lan Zi's body, blocking his attacks. Slowly, Lu Yi began to understand. Although he didn't know how the barrier was formed, it wasn't invincible. As his attacks fell, the barrier showed signs of weakening. However, because his attacks weren't enough to break through the barrier, he still hadn't been able to injure Lan Zi. As long as the barrier was not broken, Lan Zi would be invincible. As if sensing Lu Ye's intention, Lan Zi suddenly said, "That's a spirit robe. As long as my spirit energy is not depleted, the spirit robe will always be there. If you want to defeat me, you will have to exhaust all of my spirit energy." With Lan Zi's cultivation, she naturally had more spirit energy than Lu Yi. Moreover, in a battle like this, Lu Ye's spirit energy was depleted more. Before Lu Ye's spirit energy was depleted, Lan Zi's spirit energy would not be depleted. Lu Yi did not think that Lan Zi suddenly told him this out of kindness. In a battle of life and death, revealing one's trump card to the enemy was undoubtedly a psychological tactic. Lan Zi was clearly telling him that as long as his spirit energy was not depleted, the spirit robe would not be broken. Obviously, she was trying to undermine Lu Ye's confidence. If other cultivators heard this, they would immediately think of retreating. Once such thoughts were born, they would not be far from death. The only thing Lu Yi was sure of was that Lan Zi was not lying. This so-called spirit robe was probably related to her spirit energy. This reminded him of the last battle at the Golden Light Peak. It was a battle between him and the Sacred Flame Sex Saintess. The other party had used a spirit weapon to create a layer of defense. It was also the type that had an endless supply of spirit energy and was unbreakable. However, reality proved that there was no such thing as an unbreakable defense. There were only weak attacks. If he wanted to break this type of defense, he would have to use methods that exceeded its defensive capabilities. Did he have such a method? He had already used one flash. However, even with the support of the dual sharpness spirit mark, it was still unable to break through the other party's defense. It seemed that he would have to use another kind of blade technique. Over the past few days, he had been observing his third senior brother's blade technique cultivation experience. What he had learned was not only the man blade technique and the blood transmutation technique. There was a simple blade technique recorded in the experience. Lu Yi had used the blood transmutation technique to cultivate one flash. He had also tried using it and had easily mastered it. This blade technique could be used together with one flash. Lu Yi had never tried using it before. He did not know if he could use it with his current strength. However, this was his last hope. If he could not use it, then there was a high probability that he would have to call Yi and Hu Po to gang up on Lan Zi. This was a challenge for the Spirit Stream list. The first place on the list was related to the face of both factions. It was not a place to talk about morality. Chapter 421. If even that kind of sword technique couldn't break through Lan Zi's spirit robe, then it would be pointless to call on Yi and Hu Po to gang up on her. He had to give it a try. However, Lu Zi was too fast. If he wanted to hit her, he would have to create some openings. As the two clashed, Lu Yi suddenly staggered as if he couldn't keep up. How could Lan Zi let such an opportunity slip by? She stabbed the sword in her right hand through Lu Yi's abdomen and out through his body. Lu Yi groaned. Before Lu Yi could counterattack, Lan Zi's left hand had already stabbed toward his neck. If it hit, Lu Yi would lose his ability to fight even if he didn't die. The sharp longsword rapidly enlarged in his field of vision. Just as the longsword was about to stab him, Lu Yi suddenly raised his left hand to block. The tip of the sword pierced through his palm. Lu Yi stretched his hand forward, allowing the entire sword to pierce through his palm. Then, he clenched his left hand into a fist. Slap! His clenched fist grabbed Lan Zi's hand. The woman on the other side looked up, her eyes filled with astonishment. What entered her eyes was Lu Yi's cold expression. At this moment, she realized something. She had fallen into a trap. Lu Yi's stumbling just now was just a bait to lure her into taking risks. However, this bait also made Lu Yi pay a heavy price. His abdomen had been pierced by a sword and his palm had been pierced by another sword. He was ruthless to his enemy and even more ruthless to himself. Lan Zi felt a sense of danger. Her entire body was tingling with pain. This was a sign that a great crisis was about to descend. Spirit light suddenly flashed from her body. The spirit robe that would only appear when she was in danger appeared in advance this time. Rip, the sound of clothes tearing could be heard. In that instant, Lu Yi's saber-wielding right arm swelled up, tearing the clothes on his right arm apart. His chi and blood converged on his right arm in a very short time, causing his face to turn as pale as a sheet of paper. Lu Yi raised his saber and slashed down. The mountain saber instantly transformed into several afterimages. A flash. Combo slash. In that instant, Lu Yi slashed down 3 times, all of which were enhanced by the double-edged spiritual tattoo. This kind of technique, which allowed one to slash out multiple attacks in a very short period of time, was known as a continuous slash. It was specially used to break through some sturdy defenses, and was most appropriate to use here. Lu Yi originally wanted to make a 4th slash, but after 3 slashes, his right arm was completely drained of strength and he could no longer feel it. His entire right arm was swollen to the size of a thigh, his skin split open, his tendons broken, and blood covered his entire body. It looked extremely shocking. He didn't even notice when the Pan Mountain saber flew out. When the first slash landed, Lan Zi's spirit robe perfectly blocked it. When the second slash landed, the spirit robe's luster suddenly became extremely dim. With the third slash, Lan Zi's spirit clothes were torn apart and a terrifying wound was left on her body. The wound started from her right shoulder and ended at her left abdomen. Her flesh was torn apart, and under her torn clothes, her fair skin was exposed. Inside the hideous wound, one could vaguely see her beating heart. Not only did the 3 slashes break Lan Zi's spirit robe, but they also heavily injured her and sent her flying with a huge impact. However, the moment she flew out, Lan Zi's slender legs swept out like a long whip towards Lu Ye's temple. This woman didn't let go of any opportunity to counterattack. She was as ferocious as a beast. In that instant, Lu Ye couldn't move at all. He didn't even have the chance to react before he was sent flying and fell to the ground in a sorry state. 2 long swords were pulled out from his body and palm, and blood spurted out. When he landed, Lu Ye felt dizzy and saw stars. He staggered to his feet, but he was so dizzy that he couldn't stand properly and fell to the ground again. He repeated this several times before he could barely kneel on the ground. While he was in such a sorry state, the other side didn't have it easy either. Lan Zi was stunned by Lu Ye's 3 consecutive slashes. Before this battle, she really didn't think that there would be someone in the spirit stream stage who could hurt her and beat her so miserably. Just as Han Taijun had said to Lu Yi before, she had always had the mentality of playing a game ever since she tried to break into the spirit stream list. Until she met Lu Yi. She had already used all her skills, but she was still almost killed by 3 slashes. The instant she was sent flying by Lu Yi, Yi and Hu Po attacked at the same time. The spirit and tiger had followed Lu Yi for so long, so they naturally knew when to attack and when to hide their strength. Previously, Lan Zi had been protected by her spirit cloak, so even if they attacked, it wouldn't have been very effective. However, now that her spirit cloak had been broken, Lu Yi was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Naturally, it was time for them to enter the stage. However, Lan Zi wasn't stupid. She was currently seriously injured, so it was no longer suitable for her to stay and fight. If her opponent was only Lu Yi, she still had a chance to fight. It was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Hu Po suddenly rushed towards her, and a young girl who was throwing out spell techniques appeared. Lan Zi pondered for a moment, then her lips quickly moved and her figure disappeared from the battlefield. Yi's spell technique missed, and her nose was about to become crooked from anger. She hurriedly rushed to Lu Ye's side, only to see Lu Yi half kneeling on the ground, not moving at all. It seemed that he didn't even have any aura, and his eyes had become extremely dim with a wah. Yi burst into tears. Ever since she had followed Lu Yi, she had never seen Lu Yi in such a miserable state. Even when she had brought Lu Yi to Wing Mountain to ask Hua Ci for help, she hadn't been so miserable. She quickly laid Lu Yi flat and called out to Hu Po, "Hurry and take Lu Yi out of here." Hearing this, Hu Po ran back with the Pan Shan saber in his mouth and bit down on Lu Ye's collar. Before Yi flashed back into Hu Po's body, she raised her head and yelled at the sky, "Send us out. The heavens will fell from the unseen world," and the battle arena became empty without a single person. On the 3rd floor of the wooden hut, Hu Po appeared with Lu Yi in his mouth. Yi's panicked voice rang out from Hu Po's body, "Sister Hua Ci, Sister Hua Ci." The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was sealed, so Yi couldn't reveal herself. However, when she hid in Hu Po's body, she could actually communicate with others. "I'm here." Hua Ci's voice immediately rang out. She had been waiting here all this time, and she had already prepared some hot water and medicinal bandages in the hut. Clearly, she knew that Lu Yi would definitely be injured in this battle. Hugging Lu Yi, Hua Ci placed him on the bed and sat beside him. She examined his injuries, and her expression gradually became serious. When she raised her head to look at Lu Ye's face again, she saw that his eyes were open. The light in his eyes was dim, but they seemed to be filled with anticipation for tomorrow and the future. He asked nervously, "Sister Huasii, how is he?" Huasii pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She only raised her hand to cover Lu Ye's eyes and stroked them downwards. Yi's heart thumped and her voice trembled. "Sister Huasii? Hm?" Huasii responded. Seeing that Lu Ye's eyes were still open, she raised her hand to cover his eyes again. "What are you trying to do, you evil woman?" Lu Ye blinked, his voice extremely weak. "I'm not dead yet. I just don't want to move and save my energy." "I know you're not dead," Huasii argued. "Didn't I want you to have a good rest? You're the one who's acting like you died with your eyes open." Lu Ye was so angry that his liver hurt. He simply closed his eyes and ignored her. He said angrily, "You're still joking at a time like this?" After a thorough examination, they found that Lu Ye's injuries were very serious. The injuries that Lan Zi had left on him were actually nothing serious. Most of them were flesh wounds or penetrating wounds. With Lu Ye's current physique and Hua Xi's methods, he would recover in a few days. The key was Lu Ye's right arm. In order to perform the flash blade technique, Lu Ye's entire right arm had been torn apart. Right now, his right arm was as swollen as his thigh. His blood and qi had stagnated there, and he was injured both openly and covertly. Even with Hua Xi's methods, it would take some effort to heal him. Especially now that spiritual energy was restricted, many methods were difficult to use. Half a day later, Lu Ye soaked in a wooden tub filled with dark green medicinal liquid. Hua Xi sat beside him, massaging his right arm's blood circulation. The room was steaming hot and filled with mist. The battle that had attracted the attention of countless cultivators from both sides had quietly ended. However, the result of this battle was still inadvertently spread. Lan Zi from Boundless Island, who had imitated Lu Ye and rushed to third place, was seriously injured when she challenged Lu Ye from the Jade Blood sect. When the news spread, it didn't cause too much of a stir. The main thing was that Lu Ye's strength had been deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. Although the Myriad Demon Ridge felt that Lan Zi's challenge was an opportunity, no one knew how big this opportunity was. Now that Lan Zi had lost, the Myriad Demon Ridge didn't suffer any losses anyway. On the other hand, the Grand Heaven Alliance heaved a sigh of relief. As the one being challenged, it was natural for Lu Ye to win. If he lost, the first place would be lost. At that time, many people from the Myriad Demon Ridge would definitely jump out and clamor. However, whether it was the Grand Heaven Alliance or the Myriad Demon Ridge, they all understood one thing. The huge Spirit Stream battlefield was about to enter an era of domination by one person. This was something that had never happened before. The previous 3 malignant tumors, whether it was Feng Yuechan, Li Baxian, or Yan Xing, were all strong enough. However, the 3 of them belonged to 2 large factions and were opposing each other, so they restrained each other. Moreover, their strength was only individual strength and couldn't bring much benefit to the entire faction. However, Lu Ye was different. Not only was he strong individually, but he could also do things that the 3 malignant tumors couldn't. Back when he was in the inner circle, he had stirred up a storm and led the Grand Heaven Alliance to destroy 100 or 200 sects encampments in the Myriad Demon Ridge. These days, he hadn't been idle in the core circle and had constantly stirred up trouble. Although he hadn't destroyed any sects encampments, who could guarantee that he wouldn't do such a thing after advancing to the 9th heaven? If he really did so, no one in the Myriad Demon Ridge would be able to stop him. For a time, the upper echelons of the various factions in the Myriad Demon Ridge were so worried that their hair turned white. After Lu Ye advanced to the 9th heaven, how to protect their own encampments was the most urgent problem that all the sects in the core circle of the Myriad Demon Ridge had to face. Chapter 422. Name: Lu Ye Identity. disciple of the Jade Blood Sect cultivation, 335 apertures. Location: Spirit Stream Battlefield Merit Points, 9,352 points. It had been a long time since Lu Yi had used the battlefield imprint to check his complete information. Currently, he was seriously injured and was recuperating in the wooden house. Besides cultivating and reading, there was nothing else he could do. Looking at the column of names, Lu Yi frowned, a sense of sadness rising in his heart. His name was clearly Lu Yi, but he didn't know when the heavens had decided that his name was Lu Yi. This was the case on the Spirit Stream list, and now even the information in the battlefield imprint was the same. It had been more than 2 months since he had ascended to Heaven 8, but he had only opened 335 apertures. His speed wasn't that fast, especially with the howling of the magnetic field and the restriction of spiritual power. He couldn't even use the gluttony meal, so his cultivation efficiency had decreased by a lot. He was only 25 apertures away from Heaven 9, and he wasn't far away. He didn't have too many merit points, and they were all obtained from killing enemies recently. This was the result of him not selling a large amount of spoils to the Heaven's secret treasury. If he had sold all of them to the Heaven's secret treasury, his merit points would have definitely increased by several times. The Spirit Stream battlefield was like this. It was difficult for cultivators who weren't strong enough to earn merit points, but for people like Lu Yi, it was simply too easy. Especially since he was the enemy of the entire Myriad Devil Ridge camp. He just had to casually run around and there would be a large group of people who wanted to kill him. If they couldn't kill him, they would be killed instead. Every day, under Hua Xi's care, his injuries were quickly recovering. However, the condition of his right arm wasn't optimistic, and it was still swollen. Thinking back to his battle with Lan Zi, Lu Yi was incomparably glad that he had learned some special techniques from his third senior brother, Xiao Xinghe's saber technique. With that saber technique, his flash saber technique had been perfected. Moreover, he had also learned combo slash from it. Whether it was flash or combo slash, they were both saber arts and skills. If they were used individually, the burden on Lu Yi was not too great. However, if they were used together, the result would be like this. It had been 6 or 7 days, but his right arm had not recovered. This was under Hua Xi's care. If not for Hua Xi's care, Lu Yi estimated that his right arm would have been crippled. It was undeniable that the combination of one flash and consecutive slashes was a little too powerful. Lan Zi's spirit robe's defense was very strong. Even one flash couldn't break it easily. In the end, Lu Yi had to slash 3 times to break it open. Although it was strong, the aftereffects were huge. The reason for such a huge aftereffect was that the last 3 slashes had taken too much of a toll on Lu Yi's body. The second reason was that Lu Yi wasn't proficient enough in using it. If there were enough of them, the aftereffects wouldn't be so terrible. Over the past few days, Lu Yi had been meditating for 2 hours every day in addition to taking pills to cultivate. He breathed in and out with the Pan Mountain saber to deepen the connection between him and the saber. Other than that, he would read the books he had brought from Madame Yun's place or comprehend his third senior brother's saber technique. Time passed by quickly. Inside the wooden hut, Lu Yi and Hu Po were on guard. Hua Xi had run off somewhere to cultivate. Now that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had been sealed off, it had a huge impact on the cultivation of all the cultivators. Only Lu Yi and Hua Xi were not affected much. The former mainly relied on consuming spirit pills to cultivate, while the latter devoured the poisonous fog in the myriad poisons forest. Another month had passed since the baptism bestowed by the heavens. The second baptism was about to arrive. With his previous experience, Lu Yi was looking forward to this kind of reward. Not long after, the heavens descended and his vision began to change. By the time Lu Yi came back to his senses, he was already in the heavenly fate pool. His surroundings were filled with dense spiritual mist. Time was limited, so he hastily set up a spirit-gathering formation in the heavenly fate pool. He also constructed small spirit-gathering funnels in his spiritual cavities. He flashed out of Hu Po's body. The 2 humans and 1 tiger each found a suitable location and devoured the spiritual mist to their heart's content. They could feel the spiritual mist transforming and improving their bodies. Lu Yi felt it especially clearly because his injuries hadn't healed yet. After receiving the baptism bestowed by the heavens last time, he discovered that the spiritual mist here had the effect of healing the internal injuries that had accumulated in his body. This time, it was even more obvious. His injuries that hadn't completely healed quickly healed. His swollen right arm also began to shrink, slowly returning to its original state. The cool and refreshing feeling made him feel incomparably comfortable. The only thing that made Lu Yi feel regretful was that even though he was the Spirit Stream champion, he could only stay in the heavenly fate pool for an hour. The time was too short. If he stayed long enough, he might be able to obtain even more benefit. However, after thinking about it, the spiritual mist here had limited effects on cultivators. Most cultivators came in 3 or 4 times before it lost its effect. He was only at the Heaven 8th stage, so he still had a chance to come in. Another thing was that when Lu Yi tried to collect some spiritual mist here last time, he seemed to have touched the heaven's mysteries. This made him faintly suspect that the omnipresent heaven's mysteries seemed to have its own intelligence. This made Lu Yi rather curious. He didn't know how to test it to confirm this. Lu Yi had a faint feeling that if he could communicate with the heaven's mysteries, he might be able to figure out the truth of the cultivation world. Why were there 2 opposing factions in the cultivation world, the Grand Heaven Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge? Why did cultivators from different factions kill each other to gain merits? What was the situation with the Heavenly Fate Treasury? What was the relationship between the Heavenly Fate Merchant Alliance and the Heaven's Mysteries? He believed that many cultivators wanted answers to these questions. An hour quickly passed. When the Heaven's Mysteries sent Lu Yi back to the wooden house, his injuries had completely healed. Even his right arm had completely returned to normal. The second baptism bestowed by the Heaven's Mysteries made Lu Yi's qi, blood, and mind even more robust. He could feel that if he used the flash blade technique again, he should be able to make the 4th slash. It wouldn't be like last time, where he could only make 3 slashes. This was undoubtedly a very obvious increase in strength. However, at the Spirit Stream realm, there was only one person who was qualified to make him use this kind of blade technique that could kill 1,000 enemies and injure 800 of his own men. Although the cultivation world of the 9 states was full of talents, there was no such monstrous figure in this world. 2 days later, the magnetic field dissipated, and the spiritual qi of heaven and earth resumed its flow. Lu Yi let out a long breath. As a cultivator, the feeling of having one's spiritual power confined in one's body and unable to use it was simply terrible. During the period of the magnetic field's howling, almost every cultivator would feel an indescribable sense of danger. This was because in that state, not only would one's spiritual power be confined, but even one's perception would be greatly enhanced. It was as if one had suddenly become blind and deaf. No one knew when the danger would come. Lu Yi immediately rearranged the array inside and outside the wooden house. He had been worried about one thing before, and that was that the talent tree's fuel would run out. During this period of time, without the isolation of the array, he had been living in the poisonous fog. Hu Po had also been by Hua Xi's side. Even Yi was trapped in Hu Po's body, unable to move freely. If the talent tree's fuel really ran out, then he would have to rely on Hua Xi to survive here. Fortunately, the crisis had passed. Lu Yi didn't set up another teleportation array because he felt that there was no need for it. He secretly made up his mind that if he didn't ascend to the 9th heaven this time, he would never leave the Myriad Poison Forest. Even if the world outside fell apart, he wouldn't leave. The 3 sacred academies had already been broken through, and the myriad devil ridge would no longer be able to force him to show himself. With the world's spiritual chi, his spiritual power was no longer confined, and his cultivation efficiency had greatly increased. However, because Lu Yi spent a lot of time cultivating his blade technique every day, the speed of his enlightenment had always been stable. He had already thoroughly comprehended his third senior brother's blade technique, and all that was left was practice and comprehension. This required time to settle down and could not be rushed. On the spirit stream list, many familiar names had disappeared, and some unfamiliar names had appeared. It was a perfect example of the saying that each generation had its own talent, and that the new generation would surpass the old. Lan Zi had reached the second position on the spirit stream list, but she didn't challenge Lu Yi again. Her strength was indeed strong enough, and she was qualified to compete with Lu Yi for first place, but her greatest reliance was that layer of spirit clothes. Since Lu Yi had the means to break through her spirit clothes, she had lost the qualifications to compete with Lu Yi. As long as Lu Yi was still on the spirit stream list, she could only settle for second place. Occasionally, he would chat with his second senior sister, Shui Yuan, and pass his days leisurely. Time passed, and more than a month went by. When Lu Yi brought Hu Po and Yi for the third baptism, he discovered a problem. The spiritual mist in the heavens mystery pond didn't help him or Yi Hu as much as the previous two baptisms. During the first and second baptisms, Lu Yi felt that his qi, blood, and mind had increased by at least 10%. This third baptism was less than half of the previous two. He didn't know how much of an increase he would get next time. It seemed that the rumors about cultivators being baptized 3 or 4 times by the heavens mystery pond were true. Returning to the wooden house, Lu Yi felt refreshed. He checked his spiritual apertures, and found that he had 359 apertures. He only needed one more aperture to reach the 9th heaven. When he had first started cultivating, the head teacher had told him that the difficulty of opening apertures would increase as a cultivator reached the end. Therefore, many cultivators in the spirit stream stage were unable to open 360 apertures. Everyone's aptitude and talent were different, and many people had different limits on the number of apertures they could open. However, as long as one switched to a heaven-grade cultivation technique and opened 240 apertures, they would have the qualifications to reach the Cloud River stage. Ever since Lu Yi had opened his apertures, he had never experienced the increasing difficulty that the head teacher had told him about. He felt that every time he opened his apertures, the difficulty was about the same. This was related to the purity of his spiritual power. No matter how pure other cultivators' spiritual power was, as long as they had taken spirit pills, they would have accumulated pill toxins. The higher their cultivation base, the more severe the pill toxins would be. Although there were methods to remove the pill toxins, it was the same as when a cultivator was injured. On the surface, it seemed that the injury had completely healed, but in reality, there were still hidden injuries that couldn't be detected. Chapter 423. Pill toxins accumulated in a cultivator's body were like this. The more pill toxins accumulated, the more difficult it would be to open the apertures. Lu Yi had been using the innate tree to burn pill toxins ever since he started cultivating. Although there was a period of time when the innate tree ran out of fuel, causing a large amount of pill toxins to accumulate, as he replenished the fuel of the innate tree, the accumulated pill toxins were also burned away. His spiritual energy was purer than anyone else's, so he never felt too much resistance during the process of opening the apertures. Of course, in terms of speed of opening the apertures, Giant Armor was fully deserving of the title. Giant Armor was able to rise from the 7th heaven to the Cloud River. Just this point alone was unparalleled throughout history. However, Giant Armor's situation was special. After all, no cultivator would have a Yao core like his. Rousing his spiritual energy, he charged towards the last unopened spiritual aperture. This spiritual aperture was very close to the source aperture, almost right next to it. When a cultivator stepped onto the path of cultivation, the first spiritual aperture they opened was the source aperture. The last spiritual aperture of the spirit stream realm was near the source aperture. This way, when they reached the cloud river realm, all of the spiritual apertures would be connected, forming a large cycle. Spiritual energy continued to surge, attacking again and again until a certain moment, the thick barrier of the spiritual aperture was broken. Spiritual energy flowed in, filling the newly opened spiritual aperture. The great circle of the spirit stream realm. At this time, the 360 apertures were scattered throughout Lu Ye's limbs and bones. Therefore, if a cultivator accidentally lost an arm or a leg in battle, it would greatly affect their strength. This effect was not only caused by the loss of the limb, but also by the loss of the spiritual aperture, which had a greater impact. Regrowing a severed limb was too far away for the cultivation world of the 9 provinces. No one had ever heard of such a bizarre thing. However, it was possible to reconnect a severed limb. As long as the limb was intact, there was a chance to reconnect it. That required extremely high medical skills. In the spirit stream realm, opening all 360 apertures was the great circle of the spirit stream realm. At this point, the cultivation of the spirit stream realm had basically reached the end. Generally speaking, only cultivators from third-rank sects and above had the qualifications to cultivate to the great circle of the spirit stream realm. This didn't mean that the sects above the third rank had any special cultivation method. It was just that when they recruited disciples, the disciples with good aptitude would be taken in by the sects above the third rank. Only those who were rejected by the sects below the third rank would be recruited by the sects below the third rank. For example, the last recruitment ceremony held by Third Saint Academy was the host. Many small and medium-sized sects were the organizers. The most outstanding disciples would be taken in by Third Saint Academy. The rest would be picked by the small and medium-sized sections. After such rounds of selection, outstanding talents would always appear in the large sects, while the small sects could only accept those with poor aptitude. However, nothing was absolute. There were always some unpolished gems that were unknown to others when they were young. If those small and medium sects could pick up such talents, they would also have the opportunity to raise their own sect's rank. Any cultivator who reached the grand completion stage would definitely be able to advance to the true lake stage. There was an 80 to 90% chance that they could even advance to the divine ocean stage. The prerequisite was that they didn't die young. The competition in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures was very cruel. If one was killed on the road to growth, then let alone advancing to the divine ocean stage, it would be difficult to even reach the true lake stage. During this period of time, Lu Yi had killed a lot of 9 heavens cultivators, especially when he was trying to break through to the spirit stream list. In the first few days, almost all of the cultivators he encountered were killed. With the last aperture opened, Lu Yi surged his spiritual energy and passed it through the 60 spirit apertures that were not in a system, making a small cycle. Waves of energy swept out and his body buzzed. 9 heavens was formed. In an instant, Lu Yi felt some changes in his body. Although the 9 minor circulatory systems in his body were not related to each other, when the 9th minor circulatory system was formed, there seemed to be some resonance between them. The flow of spiritual energy in his body also became much faster. If one listened carefully, they could even faintly hear the sound of flowing water. At this time, if Lu Yi wanted to advance to the Cloud River stage, he could do so at any time. He only needed to connect all the spirit apertures into a large cycle. There was no difficulty. But how could he advance to the Cloud River stage at this time? Not to mention that the baptism bestowed by Tianji had not reached its limit, he also had not properly settled the grudge between him and the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge. During this period of time, he had been cultivating in the Myriad Poisons Forest, and his heart was filled with resentment. Now that he had advanced to the 9 heavens, how could he not vent it? Moreover, he still had some things to do. Conservatively speaking, he would stay in the spirit stream stage for another 1 or 2 months. After the 7 heavens, he changed his cultivation technique to the great sun-colored glass art. This cultivation technique cost him more than 5,200 merit points. It was the most suitable cultivation technique for him in Tianji's treasury, and was the most expensive one. The quality of a cultivation technique depended on the order in which the spirit apertures were connected. If the order in which the spirit apertures were connected was different, the cultivation path would naturally be different. If the cultivation path was different, the efficiency of the spiritual energy in the body would be different. As such, the benefits it could bring to a cultivator would be different. The better the cultivation technique, the faster the spiritual energy would flow. Correspondingly, it could bring a cultivator greater benefits. Compared to the worst cultivation techniques, the great sun-colored glass art's price was several times that of an ordinary heaven-grade cultivation technique. However, the difference of several times could only bring about an increase of 10 to 20%. This was already a very high benefit. A cultivation technique that could increase one's strength by 10 to 20% was extremely tempting to any cultivator. Moreover, the great sun-colored glass art also had the effect of tempering the body. This kind of tempering didn't require Lu Yi to do much. He only needed to maintain the flow of spiritual energy in his body, and it would slowly strengthen his body. Lu Yi didn't feel it. Perhaps his body was strong enough, so the strengthening wasn't obvious, or perhaps the strengthening was subtle. However, this was a product of Tianji's treasury, so it couldn't be a lie. Although he had advanced to the 9 heavens, Lu Yi didn't plan on leaving immediately. The newly formed minor circulation wasn't too stable, so he needed to stabilize it for a few days. This was to prevent the minor circulation from suddenly stopping during a battle. That sudden drop in strength could lead to extremely bad consequences. In the small courtyard, Lu Yi meticulously practiced his saber art. Hua Xiai returned from cultivating outside and glanced at Lu Yi. 9 heavens? Congratulations! Lu Yi put away his saber and casually replied, "There's nothing to congratulate me about. Hua Xiai had advanced to the 9 heavens more than half a month ago. Her cultivation speed was so fast that it was simply amazing." "You're ready to leave?" Hua Xiai asked. Although Lu Yi hadn't told her about his plans, she could feel that after his cultivation reached the 9 heavens, Lu Yi couldn't continue to stay here. "What do you plan to do in a few days?" "Me? I don't have any plans. You're already in the 9 heavens. You're not going to attack the spirit stream list, nor are you going to advance to the Cloud River realm. What do you want to do? Moreover, you're already in the 9 heavens. How are you going to cultivate?" This was the thing that Lu Yi couldn't figure out the most. Logically speaking, after reaching the 9 heavens, unless one advanced to the Cloud River realm, there was no way to increase their cultivation. However, Hua Xiai was still going out early and returning late every day. Yi had gone to see her before and found that she was still devouring the poisonous fog in the forest of 1,000 poisons. She didn't know why she was doing so. Moreover, Lu Yi didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but recently, he felt that the poisonous fog in the vicinity seemed to have thinned out a lot. "I have my own ways." Hua Xiai pursed her lips and smiled, but didn't elaborate. "I'm going to cook. What do you want to eat tonight?" Lu Yi casually took out a large piece of beast meat from his storage bag and threw it to her. 3 days passed in a flash. Everything was ready and Lu Yi was ready to leave. Hua Xiai straightened his clothes for him and spoke in the tone of a kind mother sending her son off. "Be careful when you're outside." The corner of Lu Ye's eyes couldn't help but twitch. It wasn't like he was going to run to the ends of the earth. Moreover, he had left the forest of 1,000 poisons several times in the past and Hua Xiai hadn't warned him about anything. "I don't have anything to give you. This is for you to protect yourself." As Hua Xiai spoke, under Lu Ye's dumbstruck gaze, she opened her mouth and gently spat out a green, round, thumbnail-sized ball that floated out of her mouth. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched even more because when Hua Xi's breath blew on his face, not only did he smell the fragrance of orchids, but a large amount of gray fog also ignited on his talent tree. This woman, even her breath now carries poison. What is this? Lu Yi instinctively felt that this green ball wasn't anything good. 1,000 poisons pill? Hua Xiai smiled and took out a wooden box. She put the 1,000 poisons pill inside and slapped it on Lu Ye's hand. If you're surrounded by a lot of people and can't escape, use your spiritual power to throw this thing out. What effect does it have? Hua Xiai tilted her head and thought for a moment. I don't know. I've never used it before. Try it later and tell me the result. Lu Yi carefully put the wooden box into his storage bag and placed it in the safest place. Let's go. Lu Yi called out to Hu Po, and the cat-like Hu Po jumped onto his shoulder. Then, Lu Yi summoned his own spirit boat and soared into the sky. Standing in the same place, Hua Xiai watched Lu Yi leave until the stream of light disappeared from her sight. Then, she turned around and walked towards the place where she usually cultivated. As she moved forward, her cultivation, which was originally at the 9th heaven level, quickly fell. In just a short period of time, it fell to the 8th heaven level. Condensing that 1,000 poisons pill was obviously not without consumption for her. What was consumed was actually her own cultivation. In the cultivation world of the 9 provinces, there had never been such a bizarre cultivation method or secret technique. Arriving at the place where she usually cultivated, she sat down cross-legged. In a breath, a large amount of thick poisonous fog gathered towards her. In a short moment, it condensed into a ball in front of her. That ball of thick poisonous fog rapidly rotated, and a strong suction force caused even more poisonous fog to gather. In a short moment, a vortex was formed in front of Hua Xiai. Chapter 424. Although Lu Yi had ascended to the 9th heaven a few days ago, he hadn't displayed his cultivation base in front of anyone since his ascension, so his mark on the spirit stream list was still 8th heaven. Aside from Hua Xiai, no one else in the spirit stream battlefield knew that he had ascended to the 9th heaven. The first 2 times he had left the Myriad Poisons forest, his whereabouts had been quickly exposed, causing many cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge to surround him. This time, however, it was much quieter. He flew the spirit boat for several hundred kilometers before he saw 3 streaks of light in the distance. In the core region, many cultivators flew high in the air for the sake of convenience. Generally speaking, it wasn't too dangerous. As long as they were vigilant enough, even if they encountered an enemy, they could still escape if they couldn't beat them, unless the difference in speed between them was too great. Seeing the 3 streaks of light, Lu Yi flew straight towards them. The 3 cultivators clearly saw Lu Yi and stopped in place to wait. They didn't know where these 3 had come from or where they were going. Lu Yi didn't know which faction they were in, and they didn't know which faction they were in. The only reason they dared to stop was because they had the advantage in numbers. If they were in the same faction, there wouldn't be any disputes. If they were in the enemy faction, they could still take advantage of the situation. The distance between them quickly closed. When they were about 300 meters away, one of the 3 cultivators suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. He focused his vision in Lu Ye's direction and said, "Senior Marshal Brotherly, doesn't that guy look like Lu Ye?" The other 2 were startled. The cultivator called Senior Marshal Brotherly said, "Don't scare me." Suddenly, he remembered that this place wasn't too far from the Myriad Poisons forest, so there was a chance that they would run into Lu Ye. He quickly focused his vision and saw a young man rapidly approaching them. On the young man's shoulder was a snow-white monster beast. Who else could it be but Lu Ye? "Run!" shouted the cultivator surnamedly. The 3 of them immediately panicked and tried to escape. However, it was too late. 9 streaks of light split into 3 groups and attacked the 3 cultivators. The 3 cultivators' cultivations weren't too high. 2 were 8th heaven and 1 was 7th heaven, so how could they block the power of Lu Ye's artifact? Short blood-curdling screams rang out as fresh blood sprinkled down from the sky. By the time Lu Ye arrived at their original position, the 3 of them were already dead. After advancing to the 9th heaven, Lu Ye's strength had increased greatly. Killing these myriad Devil Ridge cultivators had become easier and easier. He flashed out. She casually swept through the battlefield and collected the spoils of war. Then Lu Ye set off once more. Along the way, whenever he encountered a cultivator, Lu Ye would step forward to confirm which faction they belonged to. After a few days, all the cultivators he encountered from the myriad Devil Ridge were killed on the spot. 3 days later, Lu Ye appeared outside the defensive formation of a myriad Devil Ridge encampment called the Profound Azure Palace. With the augmentation of the Clear Vision Spirit runes, he observed the nodes of this formation. A cultivator with large sleeves and a loose robe heard the news and came over, shouting at Lu Ye through the light screen of the Grand Formation, "Who are you?" After asking the question, he took a closer look at Lu Ye. Then, his expression changed drastically as he exclaimed in horror, "Lu Ye!" The cultivator was so scared that his face turned pale. He never expected that the famous Lu Ye would suddenly appear outside his encampment. Moreover, judging from his posture, it was obvious that he did not come with good intentions. He hurriedly circulated his spirit energy and shouted, "Lu Ye is here!" With a roar, the encampment suddenly boiled over. Streams of light soared into the sky and rushed over. Outside the light screen of the Grand Formation, Lu Ye had already raised his hand and shot out a few formation flags. As he did so, the spirit energy in the area covered by the formation flags stopped flowing. He raised his hand and lifted a corner of the Grand Formation as if he was lifting a curtain. Then, he walked in leisurely. At this time, several faster cultivators had already arrived, and more were already on their way. How could the cultivators who had rushed here be polite when they saw Lu Ye barging into their encampment? They all activated their techniques and attacked Lu Ye. The moment the Pan Mountain saber was unsheathed, Lu Ye's figure moved and swayed, dodging all the attacks with incomparable precision. He rushed in front of a cultivator and raised his saber. Blood splattered. His figure didn't stop as he rushed to the next one. In just 3 breaths of time, 5 corpses lay on the ground. Blood dripped from the Pan Mountain saber. More cultivators gathered, and a celestial 9 cultivator roared, "Lu Ye, you're courting death." No one would be able to tolerate someone barging into their encampment alone and killing people. Seeing the figures lying in a pool of blood, the eyes of the Profound Azure Palace's cultivators turned red. As soon as the Celestial 9 cultivator's voice fell, spell techniques and the might of imperial artifacts rained down on Lu Ye. With a whoosh, fiery red spiritual energy flowed out of Lu Ye's body. Wings spread out from his back, and he soared into the sky. All the attacks aimed at him hit nothing but air. He passed through the crowd and fixed his gaze on the Celestial 9 cultivator who had shouted. The fiery red wings on his back gently flapped twice, and he directly rushed in front of the cultivator. An indescribable sense of oppression rushed towards him, accompanied by a cold, murderous intent. The anger and humiliation on the Heavenly 9 cultivator's face had been replaced by shock and panic. Seeing Lu Ye rushing towards him, his figure rapidly fell. Although he was also a Celestial 9 cultivator, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter the spirit stream list. How could he feel safe when being targeted by Lu Ye? If he wanted to kill Lu Ye now, he could only rely on the advantage of numbers. Lu Ye's figure moved, and he was already in front of him. How could this guy be so fast? A thought popped up in the Celestial 9 cultivator's mind. The Flying Wing Spirit Tattoo was much more flexible than Imperial Artifact Flight, not to mention that Lu Ye had also enhanced himself with the Wind Spirit Tattoo in order to rush forward faster. Using 2 spirit tattoos at the same time, It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his speed was like lightning. The Pan Mountain saber wrapped in flames slashed down at the Celestial 9 cultivator, who raised his spirit artifact to block. However, as soon as the two spirit artifacts collided, he felt a copious and irresistible force attack him. The spirit artifact flew out of his hand, and the skin between his thumb and forefinger split open. His entire body fell uncontrollably to the ground under the immense pressure. Seeing that Lu Ye's saber was about to strike again, he turned pale with fright. He hurriedly reached into his storage bag and took out a golden body talisman. Before he could slap the golden body talisman on his body, Lu Ye's saber had already slashed down. Blood splattered, and the head was separated from the body. Cries of alarm rang out from below, mixed with mournful roars of anger. The one Lu Yi had killed was none other than the guardian of the profound Azure Palace. In the profound Azure Palace, the guardian had done a very good job. He had taken good care of his junior brothers and sisters. Seeing him killed, the profound Azure Palace cultivators naturally felt grief in their hearts. Lu Yi didn't know that this was a guardian. He was just guessing. After all, even the sects of the core circle had a limited number of Heavenly 9 cultivators. Every one of them was a precious talent. Killing one of them first would reduce the pressure on himself, and second, it would deter the enemy. But now, it seemed that the deterrent effect wasn't great. Instead, it had stimulated the profound Azure Palace cultivators' determination to unite against a common enemy. Everyone looked at him with bloodshot eyes. The anger in their eyes was almost overflowing. After killing the Celestial 9 cultivator, Lu Ye's figure descended. When he was about to hit the ground, he suddenly changed direction and pounced toward the densest part of the crowd. The weapon box at his waist buzzed, and 9 Imperial artifacts flew out. They revolved around each other and crashed into the crowd like a spinning top. Lu Ye's figure followed closely behind the Imperial artifact spinning top, constantly swinging the mountain saber in his hand. Screams and roars rang out one after another. There was also the sound of amber roaring. Every roar fiercely impacted the minds of the cultivators in front, making them dizzy. Lu Yi took the opportunity to kill. After a round of collision, more than 10 corpses lay on the ground. Lu Ye's body was also dyed red with blood. Some of it was his own, and some of it was his enemies'. Fighting one against many, it was impossible for him to be unscathed. Fortunately, he could use the defensive spirit rune to protect his vitals. Lu Yi once again returned to the side of the Grand Formation's light barrier. The long saber in his hand was pointed diagonally at the ground, and his eyelids were slightly lowered. The many profound Azure Palace cultivators across from him were no longer as angry as before. They all looked at Lu Yi in disbelief, and the originally noisy scene suddenly became incomparably quiet. Before this, if someone had told them that there was a person in this world who could single-handedly kill his way into a sect's encampment, and that it was the encampment of a core sect, no one would have believed it. As the saying goes, there is a limit to a person's strength. No matter how strong a person is, there is a limit. Even Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian, 2 of the 3 malignant tumors, were unable to do such a thing back then. First of all, breaking through the defensive formation and entering the encampment was a difficult problem for them. But now, such a thing was right before their eyes, right under their noses. Waves of shock surged in their hearts as they looked at the blood-soaked figure in front of them. The profound Azure Palace cultivators really wanted to ask, "Are you still human?" Lu Yi didn't waste any time. As the 9 Imperial artifacts buzzed, he once again charged into the enemy formation. Having learned their lesson, the profound Azure Palace cultivators immediately scattered and retreated. Lu Yi chased after them, charging forward and leaving corpses behind him. He killed his way to the square in front of the Heaven's Secret Hall, where nearly 70 cultivators were already waiting in formation. There weren't many cultivators in the core sect's encampment. On average, each sect only had about 100 people. Even those with more people didn't exceed 200. Naturally, the profound Azure Palace was the same. The entire sect, including their own cultivators and those affiliated with other sects, only had about 120 people. However, in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, nearly 30% of the 120 people had been killed. The remaining people had all gathered in front of the Heaven's secret hall. Body cultivators came first, followed by weapon cultivators and magic cultivators. As for ghost cultivators, they had already concealed themselves and were looking for a suitable opportunity to launch an attack.